Hello and welcome to the Weekly Stuff Podcast with Jonathan Lack.
And Sean Chapman.
We are here for the second time this week.
Yes, with a super special bonus episode.
An episode I have been very excited to record.
Yes.
We are going to be talking about the Bourne Trilogy, the Jason Bourne Trilogy, released between 2002 and 2007, in preparation for the sequel to those movies, which is coming out this Friday, July 29th, Jason Bourne, directed by Paul Greengrass. I'm very excited for this movie.
Yes, I
primarily
think we all are.
Because it is a sequel to movies I consider to be pretty historically great in the history of Hollywood.
Yes.
We're going to explore that. We're going to talk about the movies, our favorite things. I have notes written in gel pen on an old college...
in some sort of ancient script that has been lost on an alien world that you seem to interpret as English letters.
Yes. But yeah, so we both rewatched the series on Blu-ray this week, right?
Yes.
Good-looking Blu-rays, too.
Yes, they're very nice Blu-rays.
Yes, so that's nice. If you haven't seen these before, we will be spoiling them freely.
They're old movies, they're the last one is almost 10 years old at this point.
Yes, and I cannot recommend them highly enough.
Yes, they are some of the best action movies ever made. They are kind of the most definitive action movies of the post 9/11 era to me.
Oh, easily.
Yeah.
Let's get into it. I mean, I will say some overall thoughts here because I rewatched these last year. Actually, before I knew they were making the new one. They got this one into production and to theaters very fast.
Yeah.
When I rewatched these last time, it was still kind of maybe they'll do it, maybe they won't, and I was just thinking it was never going to happen. And to be fair, I never needed it to because this is about as definitive an ending as a trilogy tends to get. But I'm still curious about this new one. But last time I watched them, I was so fascinated. I was so taken with how these movies, I think, play even stronger now than they did on release.
Yeah.
And how well they hold up and have gotten better with time. And I was struck even more by that this time. Just really thinking of them with a critical eye because I knew I was going to be talking about them on the podcast.
Yeah.
This is a trilogy that I think is historic in a number of ways. If we just go qualitative, there is no other film trilogy I can point to, including my beloved Lord of the Rings trilogy, where I think there is a substantial qualitative improvement between each movie.
Yeah.
And I think each movie builds on the last. I think this is truly a one story told over three movies, where we start in one place, Jason has a goal, and he achieves it at the end of the third movie, and there are stories told along the way. Each movie stands on its own, but each movie is an evolution. It is a commentary on its times that was so prescient, it's somewhat mind-blowing.
Yeah.
When you look at how this deals with whistleblowing and information leaks 4
It's
years
government
before
surveillance.
4 years before Edward Snowden did
Yeah.
his stuff. It's mind-blowing when you look at what this movie was thinking about, when these movies were thinking about. I think they are some of the best action movies ever made. I think the Bourne Ultimatum in particular, the third movie. Can you name me another Hollywood third movie that does that good a job at being a conclusion and a sequel and wrapping things up in a satisfactory way?
Probably not. It's a really fucking good movie.
It does everything right that movies like Spider-Man 3 and The Dark Knight Rises and any other bad trilogy cappers you can name. We could go on all day.
Go back to Return of the Jedi or something.
Return of the Jedi, Back to the Future 3, whichever ones you want to name. What those ones miss, the Bourne Ultimatum does perfectly, pitch perfectly. And, this is a trilogy that I think starts imperfectly. I think the Bourne Identity is a good but not great movie.
Yeah.
I think it's a solid B+. It was made by Doug Liman, who is a good journeyman Hollywood director. I like some of his movies like Mr. and Mrs. Smith and Edge of Tomorrow. Live, Die, Repeat.
Yeah.
He's fine, but he's no Paul Greengrass, and it's a good little start to the franchise. But the jump between the Bourne Identity and the Bourne Supremacy is nuts.
Yeah.
I've never seen anything like that. One movie to the next doing something like that. And I have said this before, I think the two most influential Hollywood movies for the decade of the 2000s are Shrek, because every animated movie just became Shrek, and the Bourne Supremacy. Because every action movie after the Bourne Supremacy tried to do what the Bourne Supremacy did, which was mix handheld camera work and kind of frenetic editing with down-to-earth, tension-based action. And it's amazing to me, though, because no one did it right.
Yeah.
We had this whole era of everyone doing shaky cam, and when you actually look at the Bourne Supremacy, it's not shaky cam. Mm-hmm. It's handheld photography. It's basically they took a European art movie format, did it in a Hollywood action drama, and completely revolutionized how people were making these things.
Yeah.
So there's so many superlatives you can assign to these when you kind of think about their historical context, and that they were coming out in this era. And there were so few movies that were doing a good job of looking at George Bush era policies of security and warfare. And so, you have the Bourne Identity, which comes out 1 year after 9/11, probably was not made with much response to that.
Yeah.
But it feels of the moment. It's, these are based on Cold War novels. They do not feel like they are Cold War era stories.
I mean, obviously they're like massively updated and changed
Yes.
for these films.
We'll talk about that in a second. Yeah. But then when you jump to the Bourne Supremacy, and particularly the Bourne Ultimatum, and they have something on their mind, and it is not said in a sledgehammer fashion. You can kind of, if you're not paying attention, you might miss what it's looking at.
Yeah.
But they are very cerebral looks at what was going on in the world in this period, and frankly, seeing what has happened since, they have become even more prescient.
Yeah, and there are movies that, going back to them now, because one of the reasons why I wanted to do this wasn't even just that I needed to rewatch these movies before the new one came out because I wanted to see the new one, but also just I had not seen them in a long time, because the last time I watched them was I watched Identity and Supremacy on DVD we rented before Ultimatum came out. So then I could see Ultimatum in the theater, and then I hadn't gone back to them since then. Even though I loved them, I just never had the time to. We didn't own them, so I've never had the opportunity to go back and watch them again. So I just really wanted to watch these movies again, and I was insanely struck by how not only just for their time, but even now in a lot of ways they feel ahead of their time, like ahead of our time now in terms of how they film action, just in sort of a stylistic sense. There's a lot of stuff of we praised Captain America the Winter Soldier so much when that came out for its action sequences, and I think those action sequences are spectacular. And rewatching the Bourne stuff made me realize just how much the way the action is shot in there, and a couple of the sequences in Civil War also are so inspired by how the Bourne movies did it. But even then, they can't match up with the ways that the Bourne movies handle the pacing, the ratcheting up of tension, in the way that everything about those movies are all three of them, but particularly Ultimatum, is insanely good at this, of understanding where the pace is at, how to just push the pace up a little bit at a time and focus insanely hard on whatever is going on in the moment, so that the action set pieces in Supremacy and Ultimatum in particular just are ratcheting up the tension. All the music is going up, the acting, the editing, everything is in concert in the movie at once to make the tension and the excitement as extreme as possible. And then when the action sequence ends, everything drops for a second, and Matt Damon is so fucking good in these movies, and when an action sequence ends and he's finally defeated this agent, or he's gotten away from the cops, the tension that leaves him and his performance so mimics you as the audience. And so just stylistically, the way the action sequences all across the board are done is just superlative. I think the way that these movies blend different styles of action is also ahead of its time, in terms of that it takes stuff like kung fu action sequence choreography with the hand-to-hand fights that are in these movies between the different agents. And so they mix that with chase sequences, and particularly car sequences that are much more popular over here, and mix that with gunfight sequences as well, and blend all those things together so that stylistically it has so many different influences that it comes across as just being completely unique and novel. Again, even now, almost 10 years later from the last one, the way that they handle the action sequences feels so above and beyond what anything else is doing.
I think the best constructed action sequence in the entire trilogy isn't even an action sequence. Mm-hmm. It's the Waterloo Station sequence in Bourne Ultimatum, where he's got the journalist Simon Ross on the phone, and he's trying to get him to safety. Yeah. There is one punch thrown in that fight, or in that whole sequence, but it's a 20-minute long thing that builds and builds until you have this basically gunshot goes off. And it is a absolute masterclass of editing, because you're going between all these different locations and perspectives and characters, and it builds tension so effectively. And in that particular sequence, there's not even any fighting going on.
Yeah.
So they can do that without even any. Just there's imminent danger, but there is no physical thing going on.
Yeah, and that is the other thing about the movies, are that they have their clear big action set pieces of like the car chases and the fights between the agents and stuff that you can easily point to, but they are built on like this foundation of that kind of political thriller, that the political like espionage intrigue. Like they do, not only do the action set pieces kind of better than anything else, they do that like espionage intrigue better than anyone else, which is that sense of like, what is going on here, like investigating this stuff and the just maneuvering around in modern society with the technology available and the way that Jason Bourne as a character is able to take advantage of things in the environment scenario and be able to sort of like avoid cameras and just the way he sort of navigates modern society to weaponize everything and to avoid detection. Like that is another element of where they're able to just sort of like keep the tension so tight and so perfect that it doesn't have to be like the last episode we talked about Star Trek Beyond having too much action in different places. The Bourne movies, all of them avoid that issue by not having to have like big fight scenes all the time, but you can still be tense and engaged and excited because you have the tension from the intrigue and the espionage in those sequences of the movies that don't have to be like heavily choreographed and super like tightly like and quickly edited, you know?
Yes, and I love that you mentioned, because I think this is just a really good point of comparison, like the recent Captain America movies.
Yeah.
Because those are examples of very good and very accomplished movies that owe such a huge debt to these and really don't even hold a candle to them.
Yeah.
When you actually look at how the accomplishment here. I mean, that's what I mean when I say Supremacy, and I think Ultimatum is better, but Supremacy is the one that just lit the match.
Yeah.
Is so wildly influential because the way action movies are shot and edited owes this massive debt to that movie, and it's only recently that I think filmmakers are learning the right lessons, which is it's about editing and rhythm and how, you know, there's a lot of great practical stunt work here, but these are not kung fu movies where the actors are the stuntmen and
it's not like a Jackie Chan
right
sequence.
So you also kind of have to figure out, well, we can't just have Matt Damon do a fucking knife fight. So how do we edit it to make it look good? And it's something I don't think any other filmmaker has quite cracked the way these ones do, because it is fastly edited, tightly edited, but it is still very clear. You are never in doubt of what is going on, what the spatial relations are. I even think, and I think some might say this is hypocritical to say this, I think even George Miller probably looked at these when you look at the editing of Mad Max Fury Road.
Yeah, like there are definitely similarities, especially when, like in particular, Ultimatum has a couple of sequences where it has like 5 or 6 different plates kind of like spinning at the same time that is cutting between, and that is like Fury Road has that element of as well. Whereas like an audience member in some of those sequences, I'm just sitting there watching it thinking like, how did you film this? Like, how did you even know what you needed to shoot to edit this together? Like, I, on just a practical level, have no idea how that even happened. That's insane.
Absolutely. And, of course, it's worth mentioning, of course, it's all part of a continuum. I think the language George Miller helps invent for Mad Max in the 70s and 80s obviously informs Bourne later on, which informs Mad Max today. But it is part of that continuum, and you can't ignore it. And I do think these movies have not received the critical reevaluation I think they deserve, the Bourne movies. They were very acclaimed in their time. I mean, there's no denying that. The Bourne Ultimatum won 3 Oscars in 2007, which was the second most of that ceremony. And 2007 is a pretty historically great year for film. You know, that's the year where There Will Be Blood and No Country for Old Men were released by the same studio 2 weeks apart. That was a great year for movies. But you know, it dominated the technical fields and stuff. So they were acclaimed in their time. I think if you look at them now and you see what the impact they have left and how smart they are and how many lessons we still have to learn.
On a filmmaking technical level and on like a thematic level for like our society in general.
Well, and you have to talk about I think you have to talk about the technical, the thematic in terms of the social, and then the thematic in terms of the character arcs. Because the emotional ground that is covered over these 3 movies with the character of Jason Bourne, who is essentially a silent protagonist in the second 2 movies, we should say. Matt Damon says very few lines in the Paul Greengrass movies, and most of his performance is physical and facial. It's not about the verbal. There are some very key verbal moments, but that is not the weight of his performance.
Like they both sort of like stack a bunch of like dialogue near the end of the movie in like key sort of confrontations.
Absolutely. But I think you look at where he goes, where he starts as a blank slate, and he ends as a blank slate again. And what happens over the course of that, it's this very smart very tight character arc that is really told as a trilogy, as 3 parts that, like, I totally forgot, at the end of the Bourne Identity, he's found out almost nothing. He knows of Treadstone, but that's about it. He can probably guess he was an assassin.
Yeah.
But it's all about, it's the entire trilogy, his journey to that one moment at the end of Ultimatum where he figures it out.
Yeah.
And that's why I feel like doing a sequel 10 years later is kind of okay, because this is the trilogy and it will always be its own thing, whatever they do next. But it's a sequel to all of them. It's not a sequel to Ultimatum, because Ultimatum is part of a continuum.
Yeah.
So just on all of those levels, and there are so many also I'm going to point this out when I go through my notes on some of this, the litany of actors who would become famous, who are in these movies, it's hilarious to go back through, because you see a lot of people who are there in the background and then became famous later on.
Yeah.
And then a lot of other just great character actors who come in and out, like Brian Cox and Albert Finney and Joan Allen.
Yeah.
And people like that. David Strathairn in the third movie. These are immaculately made movies.
Yeah.
So, should we break down the individual films?
Sure, yeah, let's get this.
One other, actually, overall thing I want to mention before we go on. We mentioned Paul Greengrass and everyone. John Powell, the composer for these movies.
Yes, yeah.
The music is phenomenal and also more influential than people realize.
Yeah, like as I was saying with the action sequences, the way that the music ratchets up is so key to how they're constructed and how it goes along with the way that they are edited. Like, that is so important, and like paying attention to how and when the music changes is like key for these movies in a lot of ways.
And how on a dime John Powell can go from ratcheting up for the tension and then into the big emotional swells of the main motifs of the score.
Yeah.
Amazing. So, I mean, if we're thinking about the key people in these movies, it's Paul Greengrass, it's Matt Damon, it's John Powell. Oliver Wood was the cinematographer for these 3. I believe he earned an Oscar nomination for the third one. And then Christopher Rouse, who is Paul Greengrass's editor and actually co-wrote the new movie. The editing in those second 2 movies. Yeah. Holy fuck. So,
as I said, I don't know on a practical level how you fucking do half the shit that they do, just in terms of making the movie.
So those are the big names I would just keep in mind as we go forward.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and talk about the Bourne Identity. Sean, rewatching it, what did you think about the Bourne Identity?
I like it a lot. It's a very fun movie. It's obviously, like, because I didn't know, or if I did, I like completely forgot that the first one was not directed by Greengrass, because obviously the other 2 are. So it was interesting going back to that and being like, oh, okay, like, yeah, this is a little bit different. But yeah, I think another thing that struck me about the movie so much is that it feels like it's a very European movie. Like, it's so, like, I mean, half the characters are European. It's set in Europe. It's traveling across Europe from, like, Germany to Paris.
It's one of the most amazing things about the whole trilogy to me whenever I go back and revisit it, is that this is a movie that is intensely American in its themes and sociology.
Yeah.
But only the last 40 minutes of the trilogy takes place in America.
Yeah.
That's it. I mean, otherwise they're in Europe, and these are very location-based movies. And that is something Doug Liman did very well. I love the European setting of the Bourne Identity.
Yeah, and there's like a long stretches of the movie that's kind of like this like weird like spy European road trip, you know, that he's going on with the Marie character. And it's that sort of element of the Bourne Identity that I really like, even though like it is my least favorite of the 3, and I don't think it's as good as the other 2, but it has this very unique tone to it that I think is like really critical in terms of setting up the Jason Bourne character and the way that Matt Damon plays him as, I mean, like this weird sort of fish out of water where he like doesn't remember any details, but he's a super spy. So like he knows the specifics of like kind of how everything around him is operating, but he doesn't even like know his own name. He doesn't know where he comes from. And that dynamic I think is played very well. And like his journey from the beginning of that movie as someone who knows nothing on that boat to sort of knowing he's this Jason Bourne figure and sort of like kind of taking control of this new life he has with Marie. I think it's just a strong character-based movie.
Absolutely. That's what I was going to say. It's a very good character piece. I don't think it works as an action movie very well. There's a couple of sequences they try. Like the car chase in the middle is a really bad car chase.
Yeah,
like,
the car chase is not very good.
It looks like
especially compared to what the other 2 movies fucking do with car chases.
I mean, it looks like the cars are moving at about 10 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And
it also doesn't help that they're these shitty little European cars.
Right. And it's also like one of the things that I don't know if this was John Powell's idea, if it was someone else, but the music when they do action in that first movie gets really like kind of rock heavy, and it just feels a little out of place, especially if you know the other movies and how he tends to do it later on.
Yeah.
But it really doesn't even matter for the Bourne Identity, because if the tension stuff isn't all that great, when you get into the character work, it is very good, and the other two movies could not exist without this foundation.
Yeah.
And I would also say, I don't think you could have hit the ground running with the Paul Greengrass style as the first story.
Yeah, it did. His movies need this sort of like basic character foundation because like you said in Supremacy and Ultimatum, Matt Damon like barely says a word for most of the movies. Whereas like in Identity, he's talking a lot because he needs to because he doesn't know anything.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, as Hollywood goes, the Bourne Supremacy and the Bourne Ultimatum are practically experimental in how they do some stuff.
Yeah.
And I just don't think you could have done that in this first movie. And Doug Liman does a very good job kind of keeping it together. This is the only one that does feel dated in terms of some of its style. They do some weird cuts and some zoom-ins and things that are very 2002.
Yeah.
But again,
But some of the ways that it feels dated feels very charming to me. Yes. It's like, and one of the ways that it feels dated that's like obviously completely unavoidable, but I thought was fucking hilarious is whenever they would cut to the CIA guys and they're in like this fucking room with these shitty computers that's just like, it had been a while since I had watched any movie set in this period. Like, I've been watching a lot of movies that are more recent, or a lot of movies that are set, like, before computers were an expected thing in society. So it's like, all of a sudden going from not seeing a movie like this for a year or two, and then, like, this movie set in what is basically the 90s, and these shitty fucking monitors, and these shitty computers, and them acting like they're so high-tech when, like, everything is fucking, like, 4x3 on their monitors. Like, well, guys.
And while I think the location work is really good in this movie, I don't think the production design is that great. Like, if you compare the CIA headquarters in this movie to Supremacy or Ultimatum, where they're just these sleek, like almost like Dr. Strangelove-esque rooms that are very kind of menacing and interesting, this one is not that at all.
It's like someone's like mom's basement with like red paint on the wall.
That's basically what it looks like. And that's fine, but it is kind of a funny thing when you compare them. But no, the key to the Bourne Identity is Jason Bourne and Marie and that relationship. And I love it. It's such a unique version of this story because, I mean, the whole archetype of the guy on the run finds a woman, runs with her, that is as old as time itself.
Yeah.
You see that, especially in action movies of the 2000s. That's every single one of them.
Right.
But this one feels unique to me because from the very beginning, there's no real tension between them. They are kind of kindred spirits. They get along. She is interested in him because she likes this kind of mystery, but she also just likes him as a person. He likes her. They kind of find peace in each other. And just the way that evolves so organically, it's really well done. And I think Matt Damon and Franca Potente are great together.
Yeah, and her character as like this weird sort of like Euro vagrant who's just sort of like making her way around Europe, like helps make some of those tropes feel really believable when usually they like you kind of roll your eyes at them because it's like no person would ever do this. But with her character, the way she's set up as like this like college student kind of just like or like college aged person just kind of like living in Europe trying to make ends meet is obviously like living her life going from like friend's basement to friend's basement, you know. Like that, something about that character really works for me, and the way that like their romance happens feels way more natural than it does in these kinds of films.
Absolutely, and it's something that the next two movies will do a lot better, but this one definitely does. It's all about showing and not telling.
Yeah.
These movies have very little in the way of formal exposition, and I think one of the things they do very well with Marie and Bourne is that they never really stop for Marie to say, "I came from a broken family," and blah 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 blah. As you say, it never says she lives out of friends' basements. But you realize it over time because of where they go and what she says and what she does. And it's all done through action. The story moves. It doesn't stop. Things happen as things unfold, not because the plot needs them to unfold.
Yeah.
There's really no contrivance in these. There's a lot of movement and momentum.
Yeah, and as you say, like, it is always about moving and staying in motion. Like, it's either like you're moving across Europe or in like a lot of the more tense sequences. Like, I really like the sequence earlier on in the movie, right before he meets Marie in the bank, and him sort of like, you know, like that's when he kind of first gets a handle on who he might be, and then also like, oh, shit's going down. He has to sort of like, as I said, like maneuver around this bank and just kind of like avoid the cops. Like, there's just like that sense of dynamism to the movie all throughout.
I think the bank sequence is the highlight for this one in terms of tension and stuff. Yeah. It's a great scene, and I just love just the way the mystery unfolds, where he goes into the bank and he has a safety deposit box and he goes through it and he gets his passport and he's like, I'm Jason Bourne. I live in Paris. Oh, good.
And I have this fucking gun and like $1 billion in every currency in Europe.
But that's the thing, is that there's a false bottom, and he pulls it out. And so at first he's like, this is going to be a short movie. I know who I am. And then it's, what the fuck is going on?
Like, who am I? Like, seriously.
Like, that's the last thing you want to find in your safety deposit box as an amnesiac, right?
Yeah, is a loaded gun and like $2,000 in like American dollars and francs and pounds and euros.
And, we were talking about this, I think, off the air, but one of the things they established right off the bat is that while these movies have action and have violence, Jason Bourne, as we know him in these movies, is not a violent person.
Yeah.
He is, in fact, kind of a pacifist. He does the bare amount minimum necessary to survive, but he does not kill people unless he has to. And, in fact, even when he does has to, sometimes he won't.
Yeah.
And like in that first sequence in the bank, he has the gun. It's the one thing he doesn't take.
Yeah.
Later on, where he disarms the guy, gets his gun, he throws it in the trash. It's something I like that they just set that as kind of a rule right off the bat, that this is not a guy who takes any pleasure in what he's doing.
Yeah, if he kills anyone, it's when it's like in another sequence I like in the movie is when he's fighting the Clive Owen character at that farmhouse. So that's like one of the few people he kills in the movie. It's like totally understandable because he's going after another super agent that's a sniper. It's like he has no other choice,
And he tries not to. I mean, if you look at it, he kind of shoots him in the arms, but it's shotgun shot, so it kind of gets everywhere. I mean, these movies, and we're going to talk about this as we go through, but I think in addition to the sociological and political aspects, it's also just a very good thematic kind of treatise on killing and on what it means to take a life. And that question starts being asked here, and by the time you get to Ultimatum, it has been very thoroughly explored without ever being verbally discussed.
Yeah, and it's something in these movies that I appreciate that sort of makes it feel stylistically different from the sort of like the action movie roots that I feel like when a lot of people think about action movies these days, I think the main cornerstone, particularly in like American media, is that like 80s era of like Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone and stuff. And you think about Terminator 2, you think about Die Hard, you think about Commando, maybe like
Rambo,
Rambo. You think about those kinds of movies, and a lot of those movies, there are a lot of people that get shot and just like mowed down and killed over the course of those movies. Like, and that's actually one of the things that, like, the Rambo franchise is a very interesting example of, like, First Blood, where the character very much avoids doing that, and then later on, he basically stops giving a shit and is maybe getting, like, some sick pleasure in just, like, fucking mowing people down. And I like that this movie feels like, part of it is, like, maybe being set post 9/11, part of it is just maybe being more modern, but there's this sense of, like, just, like, this uncomfortableness with the idea of killing people and taking someone's life, and the idea of, like, that's not something that you're meant to do. That's not something that the government should be doing. When you find out in like Ultimatum that the one CIA guy is running this Black Ops program where he just can basically kill whoever he wants to, that's supposed to chill you and like make you think about that. Like, the U.S. government kind of does that today, and especially when you're thinking about like drone strikes and that shit and collateral damage. That like having this action hero character that is very intentionally not taking life whenever he can is interesting and different, and it feels heartening, and it makes me as a person a lot more comfortable watching these movies and taking them seriously. Whereas if I'm watching like an 80s action movie, even like Die Hard, you have to take some of it kind of tongue-in-cheek because there's just something ridiculous about it. Whereas like the idea of him not killing people makes these movies way more serious to me.
Absolutely, and that when life is taken by him or by someone else or whatever, it's a thing. It's not a passing moment.
Yeah.
It's a real thing that happened and matters. And the whole there's actually a really good, I think, duality to this in the Bourne Identity, where the whole thing that sets this off for Jason Bourne is Wombosi, the guy on the ship, and he decides not to kill him because his kids are there. It's a very nice little scene. And by the time we actually learn that, Wombosi is already dead because I think it's the Clive Owen guy has been ordered and he just takes him out.
Yeah.
And so we kind of see both sides of the coin even in this first movie. Mm-hmm. And that's very smart storytelling.
Yeah, and I like one thing I love about all three of these movies is the way that they keep the sort of like super agent program stuff with like Treadstone and Blackbriar, that even when they get more into it with Ultimatum, that stuff's far enough in the background that I like the sense of like you don't ever really know what Jason Bourne was like before this stuff happened. Like you get some clues in Ultimatum, but not a lot. And I like that there's something about the scene where he the flashback where he is going to shoot the Mumbazi character, but he doesn't because the kids are there. Where it's like you don't know if that's like the last straw for him. You don't know if like that seeing that broke his like programming more or less. Like there's an element of the kind of brainwashing CIA element of it that I think helps again add some sort of like weird believability to the plot. Where otherwise some of that. Like I'm an assassin. I've killed all these people, but like all these kids here, so now I'm not going to. Some like you see that trope a lot. You especially see that kind of trope a lot in like Japanese stuff with samurai characters, and sometimes I can roll my eyes at that because it's like you've killed like 500 people. Like how is this one any different? Here, like the element of that brainwashing makes that very believable to me and helps me sort of like build a wall of like this is who this character now, this is that character before.
Well, and like I think again because they leave enough details oblique, it gives Paul Greengrass and the sequels room to build on that.
Yeah.
And I really do get a sense by the end of Ultimatum that I think Bourne is Bourne, and I think we see him moving back and further to where he was right before the amnesia.
Yeah.
And he probably, I think it was just the tipping point. I think he was probably getting closer and closer to that as we get to Wombozi. But I like that we never know. We never find out like exact. He doesn't give a speech and say, "This is why I left, and I am noble and the hero." And that's not who he is.
Yeah,
these are action movies. There's another big difference I think from Hollywood movies of this era. He is not out there saving people. He is the goal is kind of, I don't want to quite say self-preservation, but it's self-knowledge. And ultimately, in Ultimatum, he does something that would be cataclysmic for the U.S. government. In terms of it would be a big deal. But it's not, there's a glowing doodad on the roof and we have to save the world.
Yeah, like all of his motivations come from like a strong character foundation, and I like that each of the movies kind of has a slightly different motivation for him to go after.
Yes, and I think there's something these movies prove that I think the more intimate you go with things in an action movie, the more tense and engaging they are.
Yeah, because like you said, there's no point at which it's like. Oh, like Jason Bourne uncovers like that Operation Blackbriar is about like planting these like secret agents all over the world to like kill everyone who doesn't like democracy or something, that's never the plot that he has to defeat. It's just like the CIA is up to some bad shit, but like they're up to some bad shit in this movie in the way that like they're up to some bad shit in real life. Like it's not in some scale that's world ending. It's just bad. And
again, when you watch them now, we literally know they were up to this.
Yeah, exactly.
That's not a fantasy. What is happening in these movies happened. Maybe not to the letter, but if anything, it's worse. We didn't know about drones back then.
Yeah,
that wasn't a thing yet.
Yeah, it's so like these movies are about like a man trying to sort of like fulfill the burden of his conscience, and most action movies are just like a character trying to save the world. And, like, that's really easy. Like, saving the world when it's, like... Because that threat is fantastical. We do not live in a world where, like, all human life is threatened at any moment. Like, you can maybe argue about during the Cold War with, like, nuclear stuff. Like, maybe. But even then, probably not.
Yes.
And it didn't work out that way either way. But, like, in post 9/11, the quest that people have to go on is living in this kind of like fucked up world where bad shit is going on, and kind of like try to do the best you can and live up to whatever your own sort of conscience tells you who you need to be, And I like that, like you said, it is that intimate personal character quest that Jason Bourne is on. It is not, I need to go like stop the fucking terrorists from getting nuclear weapons or something like a 24.
Exactly, and I think it's funny, Jason Bourne and Jack Bauer get lumped together a lot in like discussions of 2000s era action cinema.
But they go in two totally different fucking directions with that goddamn thing.
But I mean, that's what's so interesting is that they really are probably the two defining action heroes of the Bush era.
Yeah.
Of 2001 to 2008, they are the defining action heroes, and it is a really interesting study in opposites of how they deal with those questions of morality, and that 24 goes down this somewhat propagandistic road where it is all about the big threats.
It's about like the terrorists are going to destroy everything. We have to stop them no matter what. And if we have to torture some motherfuckers along the way and we have to get erections from torturing them, that's totally fine.
But no, I mean, we do live in a world now, and even today in 2016 that has been an awful year for humanity. It is worth remembering, overall, the world is more peaceful than it was in other periods of human history.
Yeah.
And that the threats are not apocalyptic threats. And this is where you mentioned the Cold War, and I do think we have to talk about the books for a second here. Have you ever read any of the books?
No, both of my parents have. Like, we have all of them in old fucking dusty covers.
So by Robert Ludlum, I believe is his name.
Yes.
And I have read the first one,
okay,
and some of the second one. And the only one of the movies that is based on one of the books is this first one. Supremacy and Ultimatum take the titles, but nothing else. Okay. And I'm not saying like they did so as a starting off point. No, literally, I mean, the third book is about him fighting Carlos the Jackal, the real-life assassin. It has nothing to do with the movies. They're completely different. But this first one does take... Basically, the first act of the book is roughly the first act of the movie, and then the movie goes in a different direction.
Right.
And the book... Actually, Carlos the Jackal is in that first book, too. Like, the books are weird, but like one of the things that is so starkly different is it is a hardcore Cold War era book. And... It's not like Jason Bourne is out there stopping nuclear arms or anything, but there is a different atmosphere to things. The threat feels different. The way things are done feels different. There is more about... I mean, these are kind of conspiracy-built movies, but the conspiracies almost feel bigger and shadier, but in different ways. There is a clearer villain. The U.S. government is not really the bad guy in the books. It is Russia. It is people, communists like the real-life assassin Carlos the Jackal, who intersects with the story. And so while the amnesia thing is there... the whole political side of those books is so rooted in a time... I don't want to call it dated, because those books are beloved, and I don't necessarily think they're dated in a bad way.
Yeah.
But they are so firmly rooted in Cold War-era politics, you could not freely adapt them today.
Right.
You have to do it differently. And I think it was actually very smart of Paul Greengrass and company when they got to Supremacy to just say, fuck it. Supremacy is about like the Soviets, like they don't clone Jason Bourne, but they get an assassin who is calling himself Jason Bourne, and Bourne has to come out of retirement to go fight the dude. Like, it's very different.
Okay.
So just wanted to mention that. But I do think it's an interesting point where, Robert Ludlum wrote these books that inspired this character who has become much more popular in pop culture because of these movies than he ever was for the books. The books are beloved in certain circles. But I think the movies, in part because they speak so much to the times we live in, Jason Bourne is a hero of this moment.
Yeah.
And so that's a very interesting part. So let's get back to the Bourne Identity, though, and this movie. Other notes, Matt Damon looks 12 in this movie.
Sure, yeah.
It is a funny thing. And it's funny even when, I think it's in Ultimatum at the end, they do some flashbacks to, before he became an agent, and he looks way more buff in those flashbacks than he does in this first movie, where he looks...
when you fucking get shot with 2 bullets and fall off a boat and get picked up a day later by a fishing boat, you lose some muscle mass. Sorry, dude.
No, I actually think that's a good canonical explanation. He's atrophied a little bit, and then in between the first and second movies, he buffs back up.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that.
There you go.
Yeah. No, it's just always shocking to me, because I feel like Matt Damon... Supremacy onwards just looks like Matt Damon. He's aged a little bit, but other than like when he got fat for The Informant, he kind of just looks like Matt Damon.
Yeah, like he still looks like Matt Damon, like The Martian.
Yes.
Yeah.
He is very skinny and small in this first movie.
Yeah.
But he's very good. I mean, I still think this is Matt Damon's best performance and role is in these 3 movies.
I agree.
And he gets better as he goes along. But if anything, everyone loves him for these movies. But I think if you really look at the technical elements of what he's doing as an actor, he's phenomenal in these films.
Yeah, because he's given like really hard stuff to do because these movies are like intense action movies, but they are so focused at their core on the character drama. But at the same time, don't have that character talk a lot. Even in Identity, where like he talks way more in the other ones, he's not like. He's not fucking Chatty Nancy or something. Like, he has some extended sequences of dialogue, but he's not talking all the time. He's a generally terse character.
And I still think the key to his whole performance is body language.
Yes.
It's all these scenes where he is silent, but thinking. He's in constant motion, and he is constantly coming up with plans and ideas. And so much of the tension of the movies, and this is a very unique thing to the Bourne movies to me, is us as an audience trying to figure out what he's thinking.
Yeah.
Because he has a plan, he has an idea, and we're watching him go through these scenes and trying to figure out, what is he up to? Mm-hmm. And that's lessened in The Identity. It's more a thing in Supremacy and Ultimatum, but it is still in this one, where there's just some scenes where he'll, go through and do something, and you're like, well, what's he up to, and what's he thinking? And I love that.
I think another element that helps add to not only just like my respect for Matt Damon as an actor, but just like his presence in his role in these movies is the fact that he does most of his own stunts.
Yeah.
And like you can tell that, you can tell when it's Matt Damon dangling off the side of a building and not like a dude who kind of looks like Matt Damon.
Right.
And it does just add an element of like believability to the character, and they're not asking they're not Jackie Chan movies. They're not asking him to do the most insane stunt choreography in the planet. But like he is doing difficult stuff. It's like it is intense, and it is he is having to learn all this stuff, and he's having to like run and jump off of rooftops and shit like that. And having him actually do that adds something to these movies that like makes them feel very seamless,
Absolutely.
and keeps you with the character, that it's always him, and they don't have to like choose an awkward camera angle so you don't see the guy's face or something.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are stuntmen in these, but it's never to the degree where you couldn't pick those shots out.
Yeah, exactly.
You might be able to guess, but you wouldn't know for sure. Yeah, so that's great. I wanted to talk about. Oh, I just had a little note here. Might as well say it. Does the Bourne Identity win the award for the most casual use of an F-bomb in a PG-13 movie?
No,
because it's just this. He's with Marie in the car. He's thinking of whether or not to tell her about himself, and then he just goes, "Fuck it," and he talks about having amnesia. Yeah. And I was taken aback. I'm like, it's such a common thing in PG-13s that the F word is like the big moment of the movie,
right?
And this one it feels like they just used it there and weren't even thinking about it.
Like maybe like they didn't know what rating they were going for or something. They just like, oh well, okay, we're going to go for PG-13, and I guess we can leave the scene in. That's totally fine.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the other actors.
Yeah.
You got. We already talked. Franca Potente is fantastic in this, and it's it's interesting that she is killed 20 minutes into the Bourne Supremacy, but she is like this tidal wave over the whole thing where you feel her presence in all of it.
Yeah, exactly.
And that speaks to you cannot discount the Bourne Identity, even if it is the least of the three movies. It is so important because that relationship, Bourne is literally nothing without it.
Yeah. Because that's like, it was something that really struck me when I watched Bourne Ultimatum, because I didn't remember this, is one of the earliest scenes in that movie is he goes and visits her brother, and and I just like had completely forgotten that happens, and especially when you watch them back to back, like that adds so much to the sense of continuity of these movies, and it going back to Marie and reminding you of like one of his main motivations is his relationship with Marie in all of these movies.
Absolutely, and I think if you think about the Marie character, again, talking about kind of the trope versus the actuality. And it is a negative trope to do the thing where you have the hero and his girlfriend, and you kill the girlfriend to give the hero motivation.
Yeah.
It's a very sexist thing to do. It's a reason women have a lot of bad roles in action movies.
Yeah.
And frankly, if we want to do the Jack Bauer comparison again, that's all Jack Bauer's love interests are. Every single one of them dies. Every single one of them is ultimately nullified for the purposes of the hero.
Yeah.
And that is a stain, I think, on 24, that they couldn't do more with the women in that show.
Yeah.
Unless they're Chloe, because Chloe's great because she never gets in a romance with Jack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yet.
Or or isn't his daughter, something like that.
Yet.
God. Okay. Anyway, but with the Bourne Identity, I think where they avoid that is one, she is a real three-dimensional character on her own, separate from, maybe not separate from Jason Bourne because they are so intertwined, but she is a character, and Franca Potente gets to give a performance. It's not just, I'm the girlfriend.
Yeah.
She's not a Bond girl or anything like that at all. And then her death in Supremacy is literally the most important thing that happens in the trilogy.
Yeah.
Like, it is not just swept aside. That is his primary motivation. It's not really even a vengeance motivation. It's an introspection motivation throughout 2 and 3.
Yeah, and you kind of like, there's like an interesting element of her character where you feel like maybe like after she's gone, like maybe she was almost like a crutch for him, and like was keeping him from like finding out who he was because he was like too afraid to go out. He needed to stay with her, and there's an interesting element of that with it. And I think like the fact that they kill her in the second movie, like she gets like the full first movie is almost as much about her as it is about Jason Bourne at some point. The fact that she gets like that full first movie and like the first act of the second movie, it does feel like they're not killing off that character cheaply. Like they're not just throwing away that character. She has been used. Like she has they have mined her narrative potential, and it's time to move on to something else. And it doesn't feel cheap in the way that fucking every other video game feels like it does that. That Watch Dogs or something just has a female character that maybe you see for 3 lines of dialogue, and then she gets killed, and it's okay, I guess we need to go kill a billion people because this character that I guess who I cared about was murdered. It's
Yeah.
like they do right by the character in these movies.
Absolutely, and we'll talk about that more when we get to Supremacy, about how they use that. But Maria's, to me, she's the star of the first one because she is the unique thing that makes this movie different than the others and valuable.
Yeah.
And, Matt Damon's great, but to me, he fully comes into his own in this character and the other two. She's my favorite part of this first movie.
Yeah.
So, who else is in this one? We've got Chris Cooper as the villain this time,
Right, yeah.
as Conklin, and I always love Chris Cooper as a bad guy.
Yeah.
And he's not even, when you learn everything, he's not even really a bad guy.
He's just like middle management, basically.
Yes.
He has kind of nothing to do with most of this shit.
He's the company man who is trying to clean up a big mess. And, I think they did better by the CIA characters in the later movies. And I think it's really interesting if you look at Brian Cox in this movie versus Supremacy, where he is a pretty two-dimensional villain in both, but he gets a more interesting shading to play in the second movie.
Yeah.
But obviously, Brian Cox is always great to have around.
Yeah.
And so you've got those two great character actors. I think Chris Cooper at the end of this movie, kind of his confrontation with Bourne, is a great, great moment.
Yeah.
Julia Stiles introduced here as Nikki, who does
she has
not...
a very, I was kind of surprised by how small her role in this movie is, because obviously she's more important in Supremacy, and she's even more important in Ultimatum, and she's in the trailer in Jason Bourne, and so, my memory is that she's in these movies a lot, and she's, kind of in one scene in Identity.
Right, and even in Ultimatum, she's not in a ton of any of these movies.
Yeah.
And it is kind of funny, with this new one, I'm curious how they're going to use her, because she is the only returning character other than Matt Damon that has at least been confirmed. There could be surprises, but we know they're both in it, and otherwise it's new people. But it is, when you look at this one, you would not guess she's going to become as important as she does.
Yeah.
Also, Julia Stiles is super young here. I think she was 19 or 20, and she looks like 16.
Yeah, because that is part of the character. Is she's her cover is she's a fucking foreign exchange student, so it works. But you are right.
Yeah.
It's she looks like a little baby in this one.
Yes. And then one other person, this is every movie I found at least one actor who has gone on to be a really big actor and is just totally in the background of the movie.
Yeah.
And in the first one, it's Walton Goggins is here.
Where is he in this movie?
He is Conklin's assistant. He's in the He's in the background.
Okay.
He's just not an assistant. He's one of the guys on the team. He has 3 lines of dialogue. I think at one point he's up by the conspiracy wall doing a pin in the wall. But I didn't even notice it until the last time I watched this, which was, oh my god, that's Walton Goggins.
Yeah, I had no fucking idea.
And he's in the credits, so it's him. It's
Huh.
And this was years before a couple years before The Shield, I think. And of course, he's become a very big actor since then.
Yeah.
Quentin Tarantino favorite, which is great. Yeah. So, but that's Walton Goggins for this one.
Okay.
And then, of course, we end the movie on Moby.
That's right, yes.
Of course, we have to have the song Extreme Ways, which I don't know anything else about Moby. I love that fucking song, and it's used better and better with each movie. It's just a great way to end the films.
Yeah.
And I love that it's become this kind of strange tradition.
Yeah. It does seem like something they didn't necessarily need to pick up for the second one, but I'm glad they did.
Oh, absolutely. The second movie has a great ending, and the third even more so. But yes, anything else we want to say about the Bourne Identity?
I just want to, we sort of mentioned it in passing, but I want to highlight again one of my favorite sequences in the movie is the sequence with Clive Owen at that barn. That's and it's funny because, especially compared to fucking where they go with some of the action sequences in the next movies, it's that sequence is so low key. It's 3 minutes long or something. It's a really short fight, but there's something about it and I think it's partially it's the first time we really see Jason Bourne using a gun. It's a very sort of surprising fight. I love the setup of it, of how it starts is they're all at that dinner table or breakfast table in the morning, and then the guy mentions the dog is gone, or the kid mentions it, and then that just sets Bourne off, and he's oh, okay, and it's just a fun sequence, and I love the end when he shoots Clive Owen, and you go, it's oh, hey, that is Clive Owen.
Yes,
and
another actor who,
it's then he has that great line that they repeat at the end of Bourne Ultimatum, which is another thing I didn't notice the first time I watched these movies. It was look at what they make us do, look at what they ask of us,
look what they make you give.
Yeah, look at what they make you give. That's right. Yeah, that's it's just a really good sequence.
It's a fantastic sequence, and it is a tribute to, Paul Greengrass took these movies into the stratosphere, but he didn't ignore the first movie.
Yeah.
And that is a scene that is fundamental to everything that comes later, because one of the ways you can kind of read the Clive Owen character is almost like he wants to die. He is weary. He is, I think, a companion of Bourne in this way.
Yeah,
and that
he mentions like the headaches and everything. It seems like he is done with this business.
And it's a very good scene, and it echoes. It echoes through the movies up until the point where it literally echoes. And he says the line, and Bourne passes this on to another young assassin, and the cycle starts again.
Yeah.
And it's very powerful. And it, again, speaks to how well these work as a trilogy.
Yeah.
You know, I love that we can now buy the box set that just says the trilogy on it, because it really, more than most trilogies, earns that title.
Yeah, there's a direct through line, and there are callbacks that feel natural by the time you get to the end of the day. It is what makes like watching them kind of like back to back across 3 days like a really fun experience and rewarding experience in a way to watch the movies.
I mean, this is the best thing I can say for Bourne Identity is Supremacy and Ultimatum are the ones that I consider revolutionary, super entertaining, very fulfilling on every level. I think they are better films, but I never watch them without the Bourne Identity.
Yeah.
I have to watch all three. I don't skip the first one. And I think there are cases where, maybe you have something that's good and then the sequel improves on it. You get that more in games.
Yeah.
And sometimes maybe I would just skip to number 2. I would never do that with these movies.
Yeah.
So, go Bourne Identity.
Yes, good movie.
Yes. This is one of those movies I originally saw on VHS. Also, I should say. Did not see it in theaters. I remember we owned the VHS of this. So we're going back a ways. That's an old movie now. It's 14 years old.
Yeah, like I said, it's dated in some ways that like only like the late 90s and early 2000s can be.
Yes. So there's that. Let's talk about now the Bourne Supremacy.
Okay.
Holy shit.
Yeah. This is a movie.
I want to start with a little cultural context for when this came out.
Okay.
So 2004. This was the first one I saw in theaters. So we saw Bourne Identity on DVD or VHS, and then saw this one in theaters. And I remember the atmosphere around it at the time of release, and even like with the audience I went to see it with, this was so revolutionary in how things were shot and edited that people were getting sick in the theater.
Right.
That people, like, not literally vomiting. I'm sure that happened somewhere, not in my theater, but people had to leave. There were warning signs on the doors of, like, if you have motion sickness, this might affect you. There was all this kind of critical back and forth where I actually looked it up and I was surprised to find this. On like Metacritic and Rotten Tomatoes, for what it's worth, the Bourne Supremacy has the lowest rating, which is weird to me until you consider that it was the one that threw a curveball and was asking more of people than the first one did. And of course, these are all, I think, objectively good movies. I can see now why, even though now critical, I think everyone is online with the first is the worst, and then 2 and 3, not worst, but it's the least, and then 2 and 3 were improvements. But at the time, it was legitimately tough for people because this is an action movie that has very little dialogue from the hero, is completely stripped down in terms of story. It is a very simple story going on. It's even kind of short. It's like 100 minutes long.
Yeah.
And of course, it's got this radical visual style. And I think people look at it now, and just because this has become the language, and this is the best done version of it, this and its sequel, we don't even think of it in those terms of how revolutionary it was.
Yeah.
But you really kind of have to put yourself in that mindset of, man, that first car chase in the movie where they're in Goa, in India, and just seeing the way we are in the action was tough for people at the time.
Yeah, I mean, it is the thing that's really, like, it's hard and, like, an interesting thing to talk about with these movies is, and it's definitely way more accentuated with the way that Greengrass shot them, is that sort of, like, shaky cam look of that. It's like, it's not... You're like picking like a couple of like very stable shots and cutting between them and stuff like that. It is like you said, you're in there, like you're in the car, like things are bouncing around, things are moving. When you're in the fights, like you're not, like I said, it's not the way that Jackie Chan shoots a fight scene, which is Jackie Chan shoots a fight scene fucking immaculately. This is not to criticize that, but it's just to show the difference. Is like Jackie Chan shoots a fight scene by like getting the actors on the set, putting the camera like basically in a wide shot, and letting them fight. And then it's like every once in a while there's like a big punch. There's a cut to like a reaction to the punch, and that's how you shoot. That's how you shoot a kung fu fight scene.
Up until the Bourne Supremacy, I think the dominant idea in movies with fights and hand-to-hand stuff is that you shoot them like musicals,
right?
Which is that it's the Gene Kelly idea in Singing in the Rain. You put the camera at a position where you can see the entire body of the dancer. You do not rely on editing, and you let that speak for itself. And Jackie Chan took that and put it in his movies, and kung fu artists and martial arts artists around the world did that. And that's a brilliant style, and I love that. And
But the thing is, that style only works if you are Bruce Lee, if you are Jackie Chan, which is also like there's like a lot of skill in sort of editing those sequences as well. It's not to say like you just put the camera there and do nothing. Right. There's editing editing and the motion and choreography and pacing to it. But like, you need to be someone like Jackie Chan and the people he works with to be able to choreograph those kinds of scenes and actually perform them. Takes insane skill and years of dedication and training, and a lot of Americans don't have that. Like, it wasn't part of like our culture to have martial arts in the way that it was in China. So there's a lot of that style of like action choreography and stuff never like really translated well to like a lot of gunfights and stuff in American action sequences. It can feel very boring because they're kind of shot in that way. And this is fucking as completely as far away from that as you could possibly be. And what's frustrating is a lot of movies took a lot of those ideas, as like we were talking about at the top of the episode, but they did them all the wrong way, which is you're just sort of like, you come up with some loose choreography and then you get like the fucking cinematographer to just like move the camera back and forth really hard while like kind of shooting the action, and that's it. These are all about you do have like, you know, the handheld style, it is shaky, but that is not the entire fight. Like, there's a lot of cuts, there's a lot of very key cuts too that are actually can be very stable shots to a key object in the environment that Jason Bourne picks up that's like a half-second long shot and stuff like that. There's a huge amount of skill of editing and knowing exactly what to cut to and when to cut to it, and a balance of shaky footage to very stable footage that is incredibly clear, that gives you a sense of grounding in the action sequence. And it is not just shaking all the time, the way that like the fucking Transformers movies did it and stuff like that.
Absolutely. And, you know, going back to kind of the controversy and stuff, it's hilarious to me to put it all in context now. Because in film school, I saw a lot of European films from this period. Like, contemporary French cinema in particular loves handheld photography.
Right.
It is tough to find a French film at this point that has a fucking tripod. I mean, it's something that European films do. They took to handheld photography much earlier than Hollywood did, because handheld is that just was not a thing in Hollywood and in classical cinema. The camera, I mean, for a long time in like the legacy of silent films, the camera doesn't move, period. I mean, Citizen Kane and stuff like that, the pans and stuff in Citizen Kane are big moments, and otherwise it's static, and that's the ideal of that kind of photography. And it's funny to me that I look at this period, and to me it's so clear what happened, which is that whoever was in charge of producing these movies made the incredibly smart decision to hire Paul Greengrass and bring him on board. And Paul Greengrass is a guy, kind of man of the world. He's American, but he's directed movies about different parts of the world. His big film before this was Bloody Sunday, which was about the Irish National Army revolts in Britain at the time, in the 90s, I think.
Yeah, the Irish Troubles.
The Irish Troubles. And, this was kind of it was a dramatized movie about real events, but done with this documentary realism, and which used this very European style of handheld photography and stuff. And so you bring that into the Bourne Supremacy, and basically what Paul Greengrass and his collaborators decide to do is, okay, we're going to make an action movie like it's a European art film.
Right.
And that is such a crazy leap of logic that if it doesn't work, you're fucked. That could go so wrong so easily.
If it doesn't work, people are throwing up in their seats.
Right. And if it does work, you're trying something that people have not done before, and so you're going to inevitably spark some controversy. And it did. People were kind of thrown for a loop with this movie because, and it's not just the technical style, it is also how it tells a story, the story it chooses to tell, the pace. This is not a 3-act movie, I would not say. I've always thought of the Bourne Supremacy as kind of a 2-act movie.
Right, yeah.
I guess you could call the Goa scene 1 act, but it's not like rising action, climax, falling action. Yeah. There's no falling action in the Bourne Supremacy. So all of it is radical, but I do think that step of, all right, let's do Jason Bourne as a European art film, and it's very smart. And we call it shaky cam, and I am loath to use that word because even the shakiest moments of the Bourne Supremacy and Ultimatum, I don't think of it as shaky so much as it's very sensual. And I don't mean sensual in the word of like we would use in like pornography or something. Yeah.
But it can be like that too.
Totally.
When he fucking picks up that magazine and rolls it.
And then beats the guy with it.
Yeah, that is sensual.
But it's sensual in that it ignites your senses. It puts you in the moment. There's this sway to it where you are in the image and you are with the image. And it's just enough that you feel like you're right there. It's like human eyesight. It's actually very controlled handheld photography.
Yeah.
It's and it's kind of interesting. I always forget this. It's the same cinematographer who did all three of these. And you would never guess that looking at Bourne Identity to this one, because it's a very different visual style, just the color scheme and everything. But it's Oliver Wood who did all three of these. Clearly very talented guy, but moving from pretty stationary camera work in the Bourne Identity to what they do here, where you are in the action, you're moving with it, and then a lot of it is reliant on what we're going to do in the editing room to give this rhythm and shape.
Yeah.
The images themselves don't necessarily have that. It's where we cut. And that's where Christopher Rouse, just an absolute genius. I think these are some of the best examples of modern editing you're going to find anywhere.
Yeah, like one of the sequences in Supremacy that, again, was one of those sequences where I was like, how did they like perform this? How did they know what to shoot? Is the sequence where Pamela Landy is in... They're in Moscow, and she's like talking to all their guys, and it's when Jason Bourne is like scoped in on them and watching. And the way that it's like editing between Jason Bourne on this rooftop and Landy in the office and them all talking, the way like it cuts between those two sequences so furiously, and like in a practical filmmaking sense, I know those two things are not related in any way in terms of like how they shot them and everything like that. But there's so many specific tricks in the editing that it's like, how did you know to get that shot with this shot to edit in that way when it's like these are not stable shots, like these are like the movie practically looks like it was shot improvised, you know?
Yes.
Like it looks like they just like grabbed a camera and was like, let's start shooting this. But there's such an art and there's such a eye for specificity in the way it's edited that it's like, how the fuck did you edit this to make these sequences feel so intimately connected when I know practically they can't be in any way?
Right. No, it's that's part of what's sensual. The editing has a rhythm to it. It's very musical in a way where, unless you're like intimately aware of how these things are done, it's tough to pick apart what works about the editing, but you just feel it like you do with a good piece of music. Like this moves and it ebbs and it flows and it rises and it falls in the way it needs to work on you on a subconscious level. And, this documentary realism idea was in the water in this period. I am not suggesting the Bourne Supremacy invented it, but I do think it played a huge part in popularizing it. And this term that comes into play at this period in American cinema and American television at the same time of documentary aesthetics. And okay, it looks like a documentary. And it's kind of a trick. It really doesn't. It is a Hollywood movie. It is very choreographed, obviously. But as you say, it has that kind of improvisational thing to it where you are kind of a fly on the wall. But at the same time, there is great artistry to that camera work. The cinematography, the use of color in Supremacy and Ultimatum is absolutely gorgeous. And it takes a couple viewings, I think, to really notice that because there's so much else going on.
Yeah.
But I've seen them enough times at this point that I really picked up on it this time. The Bourne Supremacy, its primary color is green. It doesn't necessarily have a green tint, but there's just a lot of green in the image. And we start in Goa in this very natural environment by the sea. Jason Bourne is wearing sort of greenish clothing. He's just kind of this green permutates. What am I trying to say? Permeates everything. There we go.
Sure.
And you have that, and it kind of follows through wherever you go in that movie. And then the Bourne Ultimatum is blue. It has a lot of blue in it up until you get very blue in the New York section. And again, it's not that they're like putting a tint on the lens. There might have been some of that in post-production, but it kind of follows with the locations you're in, what you're building to. And so they have these very distinct visual signatures and just a great sense of composition and color, which is another thing you don't get generally in movies that use this. Like when we talked about Captain America, Winter Soldier, and Civil War earlier, I think those are good-looking movies and well-shot movies. They do not have a particular visual signature. We even talked about Civil War kind of being opposed to having a core aesthetic, in part, I think, to let the colors of the superheroes pop and whatnot.
Yeah.
But that is not what it's going for. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, but it's amazing that you can do something like that even more accomplished and have all of that on top.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, no, it is definitely, like you said, while it has that handheld look and the image is not stable, it's not steady, like you do have that sense of color and that sense of composition to the frame that when these kinds of movies are made, often they do not have that there are like shots in these movies that like are very striking and memorable,
Yes, absolutely. That entire opening section in Goa is just a revelation, I feel, when you watch these back to back. Because right off the bat, before any action even starts, you just get this sense that, oh, something has changed between Identity and this.
Yeah.
And it is quiet, it is introspective. You have these just nice little scenes between Jason and Marie. And I say scenes, it's really one scene with them in bed at night, and then he gets up, and they have this talk out on the beach. And it's a beautiful environment, but it's more about this kind of liminal space and what they're in, and kind of this in-between nature of their, not necessarily their relationship, but Jason's relationship with himself, Marie trying to get through to this guy and help him get through to himself. So much is given to us in that first scene, and it's all done through visual information.
Yeah, like, I love there's, in that sequence when it's Marie is like kind of going through his scrapbook while Jason is jogging on the beach, and there's a weird tension to that sequence where it's cutting back and forth between the two of them. That's like in like a different version of the movie, like that could build up to him like running there and like catching her, like looking in on her past and getting angry at that. That's not where they go with it, but it evokes that sense of like he is frustrated, he's not there, like, and Marie's like digging into his past, and like both of them are kind of trying to solve his problems, but neither of them know how to. And there's a distinct tension between the characters just through, again, like the sense of editing between those two shots and those two sequences and mixing them together. That's just completely visual, and there's no element of like narrative of them talking about that and like trying to describe that tension to each other. It just exists naturally through the editing.
No, these two films are absolute masterpieces of visual storytelling.
Yeah.
There is dialogue, but it is secondary to everything else that is going on. The stories are told visually. Bourne's journey is told through performance, through camera work, through editing. None of it relies really on the script to be conveyed. I mean, one of the names that you could also put in the mix here is the scriptwriter of these three films is credited to Tony Gilroy, who is a very talented writer and director in his own right. But from what I have learned since these movies came out, his script was pretty much used for Bourne Identity.
Yeah.
But while he wrote drafts for Supremacy and Ultimatum, they basically weren't used. Like he complained in public about for Supremacy, they stripped it down so far that he barely saw his script on screen.
Right.
And then he wrote one draft of Ultimatum and left, and apparently they completely rewrote it. And so he's credited because that's a WGA thing, but really not involved in it. And it's actually, I think, very apparent because he wrote and directed The Bourne Legacy, and I think he fundamentally misunderstood what the movies were about.
Right.
And again, it's a talented guy. The year Bourne Ultimatum came out, Tony Gilroy wrote and directed Michael Clayton with George Clooney, which is a really good little movie. But he's a different kind of writer, and there is that kind of tension between the script and Paul Greengrass. And I think in Supremacy you can feel it working out where there's always these hints of a bigger story.
Yeah.
But that's not the story here. I love how direct and simple the Bourne Supremacy is, which is Marie dies, and Jason has this memory in the back of his head, and he decides after she dies, I'm going to figure out what this memory is, and then I'm going to apologize for it.
Yeah.
That is the entire movie. Is the first act is he tries to figure out what happened, he figures it out, and then he goes to apologize. And he fights like hell the entire time, but his enemies at no point are the CIA or the assassins. That is incidental. He is trying to get something done. They are in his way, and he's not going to like rain hell down upon them or anything, but he's just trying to get to this point where he can unburden himself.
Yeah.
What other action movie does that?
Yeah, no, like it's... Again, you talk about like the intimacy of these kinds of plots. That's exactly what we're talking about. That it is that sense of like, because that is like the one of my favorite parts of the whole movie is when you get to the end part where he's going to Moscow and you have like the CIA people and everyone being like, why is he going to Moscow? Like, what is it? Like, as if like because they still think he's this like fucking terrorist kind of guy. And you as the audience probably have figured out at this point that he's not going there for revenge anymore. But even if you haven't figured that out, that like slow steps of like, because he's not saying this shit to anyone because he doesn't even have anyone to say it to anymore, but that just revelation is like he's not like he's fighting all these people and he gets shot and he's doing all this shit and it's like all he's trying to do is get to this girl to apologize to her for killing her parents, and that's it. Like he's not, as you said, he's not trying to take down the CIA, he's not trying to take down like the Moscow like super agents or anything. He's just trying to sort of atone for what he's done in his past.
And it's something that, again, talking about, I think, the controversy at the time of the film's release, I think The Bourne Supremacy is a very difficult film to digest in one viewing.
Yeah.
Because the first time you see it, I think it's tough to even... You probably appreciate the technical mastery and stuff and the performances, But you only pieced the plot together in the last 5 minutes. Other than that, I mean, you really don't know Jason's full motivation until he gets to that room with that girl and he says what he needs to say, and it recolors the entire movie. And then you can go watch it again and realize just how brilliant it is and how deep that story runs.
Yeah.
But until then, it's a lot of you're on your toes trying to figure out what the hell this guy is doing.
Yeah, it's in some ways the plot is like the weirdest rom-com misunderstanding in the world, where it's like everybody thinks that Jason Bourne is out to like do all this bad shit. It's like he just wants to apologize to this girl. Like, why do you keep on getting in his way?
Yes, I mean, even I remember the trailers for this pitched it as a revenge story. Marie dies, he wants to go get revenge.
Yeah.
And while incidentally he does wind up killing the guy who killed her,
yeah,
he's never out to do.
But he doesn't even really, because
No,
he crashes and he's going to shoot him, and then he decides not
Right,
to. Because,
exactly.
like, that's not what he's there to do.
And until he goes to shoot him, he doesn't even know who he is.
Yeah.
So that's not even part of his motivation.
Yeah.
But it was advertised as that. There's a clear revenge motivation. And in the actual movie, there's a couple moments where he uses that. Like, he has the sniper rifle on Pamela Landy. He does not intend to use it.
Yeah.
He's not going to shoot any of these. That he knows, for one, that's just be shitty for him.
Yeah.
That's not going to help his case. But also, it's like he's using that to manipulate them and get what he needs in terms of information. And otherwise, that's incidental to what he's doing.
Yeah, exactly. Like because like his whole thing he's doing throughout the movie is he's just like that whole middle portion that involves like all the CIA people is him just trying to get the information that he knows that one of them has.
And that's where, man, I think we talked about this with like Mad Max Fury Road, where people, I think, are so used to stories that spoon-feed you character motivation and
that have so much exposition and dialogue and rely so heavily on dialogue to tell their story.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing.
No.
But I do think it comes across more powerfully when the character is just the character and you read off of them. Yeah. And Mad Max Fury Road was a masterpiece at that, and I think the Bourne Supremacy just as much so, and the Bourne Ultimatum, where it's about Jason Bourne doesn't talk much. It's about reading what he's doing, and just the action has such impact in this movie because, again, he is fighting like absolute hell to get to his goal, and when you realize what his goal is, that hits really hard.
Yeah.
That he is literally risking his life over and over and just horribly abusing his body over the course of this movie to get to that point.
Yeah.
And it is this journey of atonement. I think someone involved in this movie at one point said it's kind of a samurai's journey film.
Sure,
that he's trying to get to this one point, and that is kind of a smart analogy in how you think about these things.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's see what other plot stuff. I mean, there's so many action sequences we could talk about in this one. Mm-hmm. That opening car chase and everything in Goa is phenomenal, and it's just like the tip of the iceberg of what they're going to pull off in this movie.
Yeah.
You know, with the Carl Urban character, I should say, another actor that...
who does he play in this movie?
He's the assassin.
Is he really?
Yes.
I had no idea.
You didn't know that?
I didn't
Okay.
recognize him, no.
Yeah, this was the first thing he did after Lord of the Rings, so I remember that being kind of a thing at the time. I was like, oh, that's Theoden. No, is it? No, Aylmer. Sorry.
Yeah, Aylmer.
Yeah, Theoden would be a much older person.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Carl Urban is a fucking chameleon, trust me.
Yeah, absolutely.
He was great as Theoden.
Yeah, no, he's the assassin in this, and his only dialogue is in Russian, so
Yeah.
that's one way you might not recognize him.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
yes.
that's probably why.
Still one of my favorite things he's done. I think he's really good in this.
Yeah, no, he's...
That's
yeah.
just this... Because he's completely just quiet and deadly. And I don't think you quite get that sense of any other assassin that goes after Bourne.
Yeah.
Someone who's just completely ruthless.
Yeah.
You know, he shoots Marie, he fucks up. And he also, doesn't care. Like, he's completely amoral. If you look at kind of his plot in the movie where, like, when you see him again later, he's in that nightclub.
Yeah,
and
he's just
women.
getting money. Like, that's all he cares about. Yeah.
Yep. And so it's... If anything, it's kind of easy for Bourne to beat him because Bourne is actually fighting for something.
Yeah.
And he's more motivated than just, oh, man, I got to clean this shit up.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you got Carl Urban in there. That's great. I mean, if we're just talking about the cast, I think the big addition here that is really key to these last two movies is Joan Allen, who plays Pamela Landy, who is a really great character.
Yeah, that was, again, on my rewatch, that was something I was kind of surprised at because I didn't remember her as being as important to these movies, but on rewatching them, like, she's one of the key characters in both Supremacy and Ultimatum, and she's really good.
And she has this relationship that forms with Bourne, even though they have, I think, about 10 seconds of screen time together in Ultimatum, and that's it.
Yeah.
But
yeah, and half of the dialogue that they have together is repeated in the two movies. So it's the same lines of dialogue.
Exactly. So, but she's a really interesting character, and I think it helps flesh out the CIA because she is not a straw man. She is not a two-dimensional villain.
Yeah, exactly. It helps make the CIA not feel too much like this weird monolithic villain organization and feels more real. Like, you know there are good people working there that like... But there are also bad people working there, and it's dynamic.
And she's an interesting character because she comes in, she's very good at her job.
Yeah.
She is like as good as Bourne is at this particular management kind of job. And so she's a good adversary for him. And initially they are working opposite from one another. They are opposed. But that's just because she doesn't have all the information yet. And once she finds information, she is willing to bring that in and reconsider things. And again, she is technically an antagonist in this movie for part of the runtime.
Yeah.
And that's very rare to have that, I think, where you really understand that antagonist and they are willing to negotiate their own positions over the course of the film.
Yeah, because it's one thing, I just really appreciate that she feels like this is a supremely reasonable character that's like, if she encounters evidence that indicates that Jason Bourne is not actually involved with the plot and all that stuff that killed her agents, she doesn't need to go after him. And it's like, it feels like in the cliche version of these movies, like some sort of vendetta builds up between the two characters. And it's like, even if she found out, she's just, fuck it, I'm still going to kill him. I like that it's just like, no, she's just, it's kind of like in the last episode we were talking about Star Trek. It is nice to see characters who are just professionals that are good at their job sometimes. And that is exactly what the Landy character is. It's like, she is a moral person who is very good at her job, and she's not going to like kill Jason Bourne just for like publicity or something. She's not going to kill him unless she needs to or go after him unless she has a good reason to.
Yes.
And she thinks she does at the beginning of the movie.
And I think that puts the Brian Cox character in a very interesting position here, where he is the villain. I mean, he's doing some bad shit. He's he's the only person in these movies who is just full on corrupt bad.
Yeah.
Because even in the third movie, you have like Noah Vosom, who's doing bad things, but he's been authorized to do them by the U.S. government.
Yeah, it feels like he's the guy who sort of like believes in these sort of like extraordinary governmental powers he's been given, and not necessarily he's just like cackling with like there's like hordes of corrupt money that he's stolen through his operations, you know?
Yeah, and I think, to be fair with the Brian Cox character, this is the kind of character, to me, you can only pull off if you have Brian Cox.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like, if you have anyone different or lesser, I think it's cheesy, but because it's him, it works. And also because they take him out like halfway through the movie.
Yeah.
It's a really weird thing where Bourne figures it out, gets him on tape, and then he kills himself. And you realize, okay, this was not the focus of the movie at all. We've got another 40 minutes to go. The whole Moscow section is after that.
Yeah.
So that's all very interesting.
Yeah.
So you have those characters. The award for small actress in a background part here for me is Michelle Monaghan, who shows up. She is one of the people. Same thing as Walton Goggins. She's just one of the random IT people. But Michelle Monaghan, of course.
There are lots of those people in these movies, so it's not surprising that you would catch a few stars in there.
Yes.
When you cast that net.
I love that you have future stars who are basically glorified extras.
Yeah.
And so you have Michelle Monaghan in this one. We already mentioned Carl Urban. Nikki continues to be an interesting character here. Julia Stiles. I really like how she's used. She's sort of in one long scene.
Yeah.
And it's a detail I always forget that comes back in the Bourne Ultimatum, where you realize, and it's just like one line, that she and Jason were involved before he had amnesia.
Yeah.
And she strongly implies that, and it completely reorients how you read her scenes. But I feel like they kind of knew that in the Bourne Supremacy, because the way she does things here, no one would put up with this guy unless they knew him as someone else.
Yeah, it feels like she has sort of mixed motivations. Like she doesn't really know who she's working for because she has this sort of enigmatic relationship with Jason, but definitely one where because you know that she was his handler when he was in Paris, and that's where he was stationed. So it makes sense that they have this sort of rapport together.
So that's nice. Anyone I'm forgetting so far in terms of cast and characters?
I'm not sure, because there are the bunch of sort of small characters that are in these movies.
But no, I mean, Joan Allen is the big addition in this one, and she's fantastic, and even better in the next one.
Yeah. Another thing with the Pamela Landy character that's in this movie and the next one that, again, goes back to the sort of show, don't tell, and it's so much about sort of inference that I really like, is that they don't do a thing where they try to make a big sort of character motivation thing around some of the sort of sexism in the workplace plot line, but there is definitely, I think there is a distinct sense with her relationship with some of her superiors and coworkers that are male, in both of these movies, it's like in the Brian Cox character in this one, and then like her male counterpart in the next one, that like there is a like woman in the boys club kind of thing going on, but it's in the background, and it's about you having to sort of like infer that stuff, and it's not trying to bring that to the forefront. And there's something about that makes it way more impactful, where you get the sense of this character's journey in the CIA and how hard she must have worked to get here, and the ways that all these other male characters are kind of like underestimating her or kind of like pushing her around a bit, probably because she's a woman, and that's like the way that sort of workplace dialogue works, you know?
Yeah, and I hadn't even consciously thought of that, but I totally pick up on it because it's part of the story without being part of the verbalization of the story.
Yeah, it's just something that like about her character that feels like it is in the background. It's part of her motivation, but they don't have a bunch of character dialogue about it where she like sits down with like her like good assistant and complains about it or something. It's just there implicitly in her relationships with some of these other male characters.
Yeah. So I want to talk about a few key scenes in a second, but just in terms of general stuff, the other technical aspect I forgot to mention is the sound design in this movie.
Okay,
To an even greater extent in Bourne Ultimatum, which won both of the Oscars for sound stuff, and deservedly so. But the way Paul Greengrass uses sound, where it's just a huge part of why the tension in the movie works, because you have these layered voices on top of other voices, on top of
dialogue stuff.
Yeah, a lot of dialogue stuff on top of this kind of percussive music and all these unique sonic spaces. So if you have, I would go back to that scene where Jason has the sniper rifle trained on Pamela Landy, and they're going back and forth. Part of that is that in the room you have all these people talking and this very dense, like cacophony of sound.
Yeah.
And then outside you have Jason and it's sort of city sounds. They're very rich and dense soundscapes where every location is differentiated and kind of united by how they do the sound work in the background. Yeah. It's a huge part of how that kind of illusion, as you say, between all this stuff works, of the kind of captured on the fly reality. Well, in reality it's not captured on the fly. It's very hard work that goes into making it all happen. But just throughout all of this, just the amount of just little details in the sound is fantastic.
Yeah, and then in like the more extended action set pieces, the way that the sound work sort of escalates, and I love there's the gunshot when Jason Bourne gets shot in Moscow. There's something about the sound work on that is like maybe the most effective gunshot in a movie I've ever seen. That like there's, and it has to do with the way that it's edited, but also like the sound effect they use and the way they cut with the sound effect. And when Jason's shot, and you haven't seen him be shot since like the very beginning of Bourne Identity. So it's like there's something like very impactful about that they do in all the action sequences.
And that's the start of that particular sequence.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that.
Yeah.
that's where we're starting. We're going to shoot the guy and then have a whole
action. Because it is like that is the like sort of like starting race pistol for this shit's going to go down real style now.
So, a couple of action sequences to talk about.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about Goa earlier. There's just a lot of good tension sequences, like the whole thing with Nikki, where he kind of gets her onto the train and they go back.
That's a fucking great scene. That's like one of those, like, it's not an action sequence, but it's like this so tautly choreographed kind of like espionage sequence that by the time you get to the end of it and like Nikki's sort of like on the ground crying and Jason Bourne leaves, like you still get that same sense you get at the end of like a big car chase sequence of like, oh, holy shit. Yeah. Like I was just so, like my stomach was just in a knot this whole scene of like, is Jason going to get caught? What's he going to do to her? Like there's so much that they balance with the tension in those sequences.
Yeah. You've got my favorite hand-to-hand fight in the series, which is where he goes to the assassin's house.
Yeah, that's very good.
And it's mostly because he pulls out the magazine and kicks the dude's ass with it.
The magazine's really good. Like, and just like the escalation of the fight and the fact like the guy has the handcuffs on the whole time and like getting the knives and all that stuff. There's a nice progression to it.
That's great. The foot chase after he gets out of the hotel. It's a sequence I tend to forget about, but it's really good, where he's just trying to get out, get on the train, get off the train, get on the boat.
Yeah.
And then he jumps onto the boat, breaks his fucking leg or something, probably sprains it.
Yeah.
And then he has to get off that boat onto the bridge, so he takes that basically just that poker, that metal poker, puts it on the bridge, and then climbs up. It's really crazy, and just the way that scene escalates and escalates. And then, of course, the star of the movie, to me, which is the car chase.
God damn it, that fucking Moscow car chase is unbelievable.
Unbelievable. No shade on the one in Bourne Ultimatum, which I also love, the one in New York. But the best car chase in this series, and maybe that I have ever seen, is the fucking Moscow one.
Yeah, it's... Especially when you get to, like, the end of it, when they're in the tunnel and all that shit. It's like, oh my god. Like, holy shit. This is, like... This is like, if they ever make an Uncharted 5, they need to fucking look really hard at this sequence, because, like, I want to play that in a video game, because holy shit. And, like, the car is, like, sliding on its side, and he and the guy are both, like, shooting at each other, and then, like, and looking is, like, going to slam to that median. It's, like, fucking just ridiculous.
And it's great also because it doesn't even start as a car chase. It starts as this really crazy foot chase where Jason is just bleeding and fucked up.
Yeah, and just like trying to get through these like civilian spaces and like grabbing all this shit and like smashing it. Yeah,
he's got like a sprained leg. He's got a bullet in his side. He gets to the grocery store so he can just get a bottle of vodka and pour it on himself.
Yeah,
all this crazy stuff. And then he gets to a car. He pours the vodka on himself. Then he's got to get into a car chase. He's completely outmatched, completely outgunned. He kind of he wins completely by the skin of his teeth.
Yeah,
it's madness. And I mean, part of it is so clearly all done practically.
Yeah.
Like those cars get fucked up.
Yeah, and again, like it is when you get to the end of that fucking sequence, and that's where like going back to the music and the sound work and how it works with the editing is it's like, and like just the way that it escalates to like where you're having all the sounds of like the screeches and the horns and crashing, but then when you get to the end and it is like. Fucking Jason's car is like pushing that car, like they're sideways and they're both like shooting each other, so you just have this like constant loud scraping sound, like punctuated by these gunshots at each other that then culminates in this massive just slam into the median, and then there's that calm for a second of like, oh my god, and Jason like gets out and it's like holy shit. It's like the end of like a fight scene in Daredevil or something where it's like, oh, what did I just do to my body? What is... Holy shit.
And as a viewer, it's an out-of-body experience.
Yeah.
No matter how many times I see this movie, you forget where you are, you forget what you're watching, you are just completely engaged, and then when they let you breathe, it's like the movie just gives you a second to be like, fuck!
Yeah, it's... God damn, the end of that, it's ridiculous.
Absolutely ridiculous. And then, of course, he just has to get up and walk out of the tunnel.
Yeah.
Because that's what he does, and that's one of the brilliant things about the character is he just keeps moving.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get... the key scene of the entire movie, which is he goes to that girl's apartment and apologizes to her, and maybe Matt Damon's finest work as an actor to date. I mean, just the way he is a shaking, broken mess, trying to hold it together long enough to get these words out. He's so almost unaware of his body that he's got the gun on her without realizing what that means, and then finally he puts it away. And I think that I don't know who that woman is in that scene. I don't know if she's an actress in Russia or something, but I think she's also really good in that moment.
Yeah.
As being kind of quiet and as the realization hits her of what the weight of what he's telling her, which, if you haven't seen the movie in a while, the plot is Jason, as his first killed this like ambassador and his wife, and staged it so that it looked like the wife went crazy and shot the dude and then shot herself and then left the kid alive. And so this young girl has grown up her whole life thinking her mom killed her dad and herself. And so it's a very powerful scene that in no way like downplays what Jason did. This is a huge sin that he has to live with.
Yeah.
And this is not completely making up for it, but it's what he can do. And having gone through what he went through in this movie, you're kind of ready to maybe not completely absolve him, but maybe forgive him.
Yeah, and it is that the moment where, because he, like, especially by that point, he had not said anything for a long time in that movie. Because, again, after Marie dies, he doesn't have anybody to talk to. So it's like, every once in a while, he, like, has a couple of lines with Pamela Landy or something in the sniper sequence. But it's like, and he has, like, a couple of lines with the Cox character.
I think that's the last time he talks before,
So it's like, but then you have, like, 40, 50 minutes of the movie where he says nothing, and he gets there, and then he like has that whole speech where he's breaking down and he's talking, and there's something about where like it kind of like reminds you a bit of where he was in Bourne Identity, where it's like he can kind of like let that shell down a bit again and sort of go back to that like intensely vulnerable person he was for most of Bourne Identity, and it's just it's a powerfully affecting scene because it is that culmination of the story arc for this film, like a very important step on this character's journey in general, and just the sense of like he has discovered a part of himself that he does not like, and like trying to sort of absolve for his past sins, even if like the person he is now kind of isn't really responsible for that stuff in a weird way. Like there's there's obviously this sort of like identity gap that he needs to deal with, but it's a powerful dramatic scene.
Yes. And really, the movie could just end there, with him walking away in Moscow.
Yeah.
And I think that would be fine. I don't think you could do the Moby thing there. That wouldn't work.
It would be too sad.
But they do have this little epilogue, which, of course, when you first saw the Bourne Supremacy, you didn't know how it was going to be used. Ultimately, it becomes a scene in Ultimatum, and so we are in media res in the next movie, but we don't know that yet.
Yeah.
So Bourne is in New York, he's talking to Pamela Landy, and he says, get some sleep, Pam, and he's just fucking with her again, basically.
Yeah.
And then Moby comes in. I think it's a really great, awesome scene in that moment, just as a nice epilogue to the movie.
Yeah.
If you think about it for more than 5 seconds, it's a little baffling why they did that, because clearly it shut down so many narrative avenues if you had to literally take that.
Yeah.
Because they've said they weren't planning what they were going to do in Ultimatum when they wrote that ending.
Right.
They had actually a different ending in place, and they didn't like it, so they scrapped it and shot the one that's in the movie in like a day.
Yeah.
And just did it really fast at the end. And I think it's effective, but you also, it's kind of like what they've always said about the Back to the Future ending, which is
right.
Once you put Marty and his girlfriend in the car with Doc, you're really limited in what you can do. And once you send Jason Bourne to New York and have him looking right at Pamela Landy in the CIA building, you're limited in what you can do.
Yeah.
And so it's one of the great, smart things about the Bourne Ultimatum script is how they were able to recontextualize this. But how do you think it works as an ending just to this movie?
I just think it's a good point to end the movie on, because I think it would be too much to end it at the Moscow stuff. Like, it would be like, you need a slight moment of to come up a bit from that, because while it's like an intense dramatic action film, like, you need a slight amount of levity to it, because I think especially with both Bourne Identity and Supremacy, you come to like the Jason Bourne character so much that you want to get that moment of him sort of to be a little bit free. I think it's important to also sort of come back around on the Pamela Landy character, that I think helps tie that ending together well, because she's not in the whole last Moscow section of the movie because she's not really needed there. So but she's so important for the whole first 2/3 of the film that bringing her back, so it works very well. And that's also just that the calling back to the sniper scene where they're talking about the Julia Stiles characters is yeah, you can find her, this is really easy, she's right there, and them all freaking out because they know he's looking at them. Then that's a really fun, good callback. So it's just strong. I think it's just a strong, memorable ending to the film.
Absolutely, and it's a great use of extreme ways where it just comes in right as he says that, and she turns around.
Yeah,
and then we kick into the end credits.
Yeah,
good stuff.
Very, very good movie.
And every time I watch the Bourne Supremacy, I think it can't get better than this, right?
But it can, Jonathan.
Oh, holy fuck, it can.
Yeah, it can.
All right, so the Bourne Ultimatum.
Yes, the last of the trilogy,
and the best. Right?
Yes, yeah.
The Bourne Ultimatum is it is a humblingly great movie.
Yeah.
I watch this and I am either on the edge of my seat or I am giggling with glee at just how fucking crazy good it is.
Yeah.
And there are so many reasons for it. I mean, everything we said about Bourne Supremacy on a technical level carries over here almost tripled. I mean, you wouldn't think they could get better at what they did in Bourne Supremacy, but they do. I mentioned that sequence at the Waterloo station before.
Yeah,
I think you look at that again, it's unbelievable. You talked about, how do you get the coverage you need to edit this shit?
Yeah, with all of the guys at the CIA, and then all the shots of the crowd, and then the Matt Damon and the reporter, and the guy and the sniper up in the booth, and cutting between all that shit and knowing how to what to film and when.
Because it's a major sequence shot on location in London with hundreds of extras.
Yeah.
It's this organized chaos that you just look at and you're in awe of. And it's not even the biggest technical challenge of that movie.
Yeah.
I mean, and this was another movie that, it's kind of funny, by the time Ultimatum came around, if we want to do historical context again, there wasn't the same controversy with Ultimatum.
People had gotten used to it. It was 3 years later.
What's so funny is that people said it was lessened in Ultimatum, and I don't think that's true.
No,
I think people saw The Imitators and then came back to Ultimatum and saw it and were and just thought it was different. It's not. It's I think refined in some ways, but the camera isn't really any less shaky. If anything, they do more of that because they have a lot more foot chase stuff in this movie.
Yeah.
So I just think that was a funny thing at the time. But I mean, this movie was universally acclaimed. Like I said, 3 Oscars for sound editing, sound mixing, and editing. All very well deserved. It was also in the conversation. I think it was a cinematography nominee. Of course, that was the year we also had No Country and
Sure, yeah,
and
There Will Be Blood.
There Will Be Blood, which won very deservedly. A lot of good cinema. That was a good year.
Yeah, that was a really good year for movies. I remember it well.
Yes. So, but the Bourne Ultimatum, easily one of the best. I think the story it tells is so rich. It is much more complex than Supremacy, but it is similar in how it is goal-oriented. Jason wants to get to his basically original sin memory.
Yeah.
He wants to get to that point, and he's going to do whatever he has to find that place, and he's hunting it down. And there are a lot of layers on top of that, but I think they earn whatever complexity they want to have because the goal is so clear throughout.
Yeah.
And that's important. And of course, what it winds up being is a very conscious finale, which is we get to the end, it's all through action, there is no real denouement or anything, it's moving right up until that last moment. I mean, Jason goes off that roof like a minute before the movie ends, and it's a very brief montage and we're done, but it feels so satisfying as an ending on every level because it feels like a thing where all roads lead here. Every moment of this trilogy leads to these revelations and these decisions, and then this very smart, symbolic, thematic, full circularity at the end, along with this is the movie that gets the most pointed in its political commentary.
Yeah, yeah.
And we'll talk about, I think, what Supremacy does there and this one does here later. But just while we're getting started, what else would you say about Ultimatum to start the conversation?
Man, like, I think it's one where... I think one of the reasons why it's my favorite is that I think it balances everything that the series is the best. Like, I think it has both the strengths of Identity and Supremacy and improves on them. And that I think the character stuff with Jason Bourne here is extremely strong and is strong throughout the movie in a way that, like, there are long... Like, I love Supremacy, but it's sort of by design. There are long stretches of the Bourne Supremacy where Jason Bourne feels like sort of a static character because he's just trying to, like, get to where he's trying to get to. And I feel like with Bourne Ultimatum, there's a lot more sort of soul-searching with him throughout the film as he's trying to sort of, like, not just get where he's going, but he's also trying to figure out what it means to get where he's trying to be, you know? And he also has a lot more interactions with other characters because the Nikki character is a lot more prominent in this movie. He's just sort of a big character in the middle section, and so he gets that, and she's like an ally of him, so he gets a lot of more... Like, he doesn't get a huge amount of dialogue, but you get a bit more of, like, insight into his internal psychology. And then I also think the action sequences are generally ramped up well. The car chase stuff is not as good as the last car chase.
And it doesn't try to be. It's much shorter.
It's a very different kind of sequence. I think the sequence... I forget where they are. They
are in, and I have this somewhere. They're in Morocco. I forget
Morocco.
the city.
They're in Morocco, and it's
Tangier.
where the Blackbriar agent is chasing down Nikki, and he's trying to chase him down. Like, that is to me the best action sequence in this trilogy. It's insane. The number of different things happens, the way that it escalates, the way that it combines all, like, a car chase, a foot chase, a martial arts sort of action scene. Like, all that stuff is insane. So, like, the action is all there. And just the political commentary stuff in this one in particular is so strong and so prescient of, like, what it deals with thematically in terms of government surveillance and in terms of sort of whistleblowing in the modern culture of sort of, like, government secrecy. For a movie that came out in 2007 is ridiculous when you look back at it now. And so, like, all that stuff combined, like, the movie feels like it could have been made yesterday, you know?
Let's talk about that right off the bat. I want to get to that because I'm so itching to talk about this.
Yeah, because it was something that, like, again, the last time I saw this movie was when it was in the theaters in 2007. So I did not remember any of the sort of, like, political stuff because it didn't feel like it was part of the national conversation the way that it has been for, like, several years now, definitely since Snowden. And so, like, rewatching it now, I was fucking blown away by that side of the movie.
I don't think people at the time even realized how political it was.
Yeah.
I mean, this movie has the Bush administration in its fucking crosshairs.
Yeah.
And at the time, this was completely acclaimed by people on the right, the left. No one realized what I think it was trying to say.
Yeah.
And I don't think the movie is necessarily political in the sense of partisanship, but I'm just saying Bush administration for who was in power at the time.
Yeah.
Not that things have changed hugely in those ways since.
Yeah.
But, like, I mean, just let's list some of these things. I mean, you have whistleblowing is not so much the issue, but you have at the beginning of investigative journalism with Simon Ross. Yeah. And this guy who has figured out something about a government program and he is being targeted. That's very prescient.
Yes.
You have Jason Bourne at the end who literally leaks classified documents on a government program called Blackbriar, which does not sound that different from anything that Edward Snowden leaked. All these programs with these weird terms. Do you remember any of the Snowden ones?
Can't pick them off the top of my head.
Right,
no,
but you know, they sound exactly like Blackbriar. Just the words and the things they did. So you have the whole Waterloo Station set piece where they are, literally chasing down a journalist to take him out because they don't want these things leaking.
Yeah, and then in that whole sequence, there's so much stuff of them trying to sort of like get access to different phone lines and like, where's that phone? Because like Jason is sort of manipulating them by getting all these prepaid phones, and the way that like, the journalist says Blackbriar in a phone call that like triggers an NSA sort of like box on the other end that like alerts the CIA so they can listen in on the conversation and all that stuff. Again, is like,
again,
we didn't like the American public did not know for sure that was stuff that the American government was doing when this movie came out.
Yes, that's the main thing to take away. We did not know. We had inklings, we had suspicions, but people weren't talking about it.
Yeah.
And the biggest line that just hit me, I wrote it in like giant font on the page, hit me like a ton of bricks after the Republican convention last week, and Trumpism now, is in the Tangier sequence where they are going to chase down Bourne and they realize that Nikki is with him. The Noah Vosen character, the David Strathairn character, he wants to kill Nikki, and Pamela Landy is saying, you cannot do this. She is one of us. She is an American citizen. We don't know the facts, what's going on. And he literally says the line, she says, when does it end? And he yells back, it ends when we've won.
Yeah.
That is the most prescient line, maybe in any movie of the 2000s.
Yeah.
It ends when we've won. That was the entire dialogue of one of the major conventions of our political parties last week.
Yeah.
And this idea of winning as if that is a thing that can be accomplished in the wars we are fighting.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so... And if anything, it's like, oh, that you're hitting us over the head with it. It's like, well, wait, no, this was made in 2007.
Yeah.
They didn't know how honest that line would feel. In 2007, you think, man, the Iraq War has to end soon. Nope.
Yeah, yeah.
9 years later, we're still in Afghanistan. The effects of Iraq have not left. And we have people still using this kind of language. It's insane how prescient this movie was.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, I keep on, like, in my head, I could just keep on going back to the surveillance stuff, because for me, that is the one that hit me the hardest, because it's just like, I was just looking up on my phone when The Dark Knight came out, which was 1 year later in 2008, because I remember The Dark Knight has that whole weird subplot with the Lucius Fox character with, like, the cell phones that, like, is, like, sort of, like, trying to deal with the government surveillance stuff in, like, the most hackneyed way possible that, like, then and now, like, didn't really make sense, didn't really leave much of an impact. And, like, comparing that to Bourne Ultimatum that came out a year earlier, and it's like the way that they're dealing with how the CIA is hacking into people's communications, the way they're using keywords to sort of flag different cell phone calls and stuff like that is exactly what the fucking CIA was actually doing. And that's insane to me that movie, like, whether they realized it or not when they were making it, like, was able to tap into something about that sort of the government culture that they probably didn't have any, like, actual access to what was going on there, but the insight of, like, what is going on behind the culture, like, behind the curtain, is just completely ridiculous, and it makes this movie stand up so hard now.
One of the most amazing legacies of the Bourne Ultimatum is... So Edward Snowden, I think, made his leaks in 2012.
Yes.
And I think in 2010 or 11, we have WikiLeaks. We have Chelsea Manning, who does the leaks from the military side. So you have all these different leaks and whistleblowers that come out after this movie is made.
Yeah.
And in 2014, the first big documentary about Edward Snowden comes out. It's called Citizen4. Have you ever seen that?
No, I haven't.
Interesting documentary. I don't think it's a fantastic piece of, like, documentary filmmaking in that it's sort of just a bunch of footage without any real editing to kind of give it a purpose. But it's by Laura Poitras, who is one of the two journalists who Snowden accessed and gave all the stuff to. And so you are in the hotel room with Snowden while all this is going down. And everybody who reviewed Citizen4 said it's like a Bourne movie. And it's edited like a Bourne movie. The language is like a Bourne movie. And this is 2014. It's 7 years later.
Yeah.
This was the documentary winner that year for Best Documentary. And one of the main points of advertisement for this movie among critics was this is like a Jason Bourne-esque thriller in how it treats surveillance and all these things. And again, just going back to the Bourne Ultimatum, And I don't even know, it's tough to talk about. It's just this thing that you look at it and you're in awe now. And does it increase the quality of the movie? Not in the sense of like the technical and the storytelling merits, but it shows you how smart they were in thinking about these things, that in 2007, we could be having a conversation that would resonate in 2014 when a documentary comes out and is directly compared based on real-life events that happened after this movie, but that echo this movie heavily. More so than we could ever have imagined fiction becoming reality.
I mean, for me, it just highlights that the movie is so powerful as an example of like art at its peak in a certain time and place in a culture, that it's like decades from now, when you look back at 2000 to 2010, like the Bourne Ultimatum will be one of, if not the most important movie to look at in terms of what is that like sort of American government culture? Like what is that? What was that? What does that mean in the way that like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington or something like that is, you know?
Yes.
It's the way that it's just like, it feels so of its moment, especially like, and you can only know that when you look back on it later, right? In the moment, the year that it comes out, you can't tell, you don't have the context to feel, is this tapping into something that is enduring about the culture, or is it tapping into a fad, or is it not tapping into anything at all? And then now that it's almost 10 years later and you look back at it, it's like it absolutely tapped into something in a way that very few things can.
Yeah, I think this was on my top 10 list in 2007. I have no idea what the rankings were, but if I were to look at all this again and say what were the best movies of 2007, I don't know how I'd rank them, but it's No Country for Old Men, it's There Will Be Blood, it's Bourne Ultimatum.
Yeah.
And then a personal favorite of mine, Wes Anderson's Darjeeling Limited. Very different movie,
sure,
but those four are my big four from 2007, and it's amazing how those. I do think there was something in the water that year. Like, again, the two big movies that year being No Country and There Will Be Blood. It is, all three of those are about America and the changing American identity in different ways.
Yeah.
And that There Will Be Blood is a kind of avant-garde Western of the Western period as we think of it. 1800s, oil barons, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
And it's about the rot at the heart of capitalism. And then you have No Country for Old Men, which is a modern Western. It's contemporary. It's about sort of this rot at the heart of man. And then you have the Bourne Ultimatum, which is about this rot at the heart of government.
Yeah.
And it is interesting what was in the water in those years, late Bush era, and what kind of art came from it in Hollywood.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and again, the big action Bourne takes in this movie on a non-personal level is he gets that stuff from Noah Vosem's safe. It's literal, and again, the damning proof is the murder of U.S. citizens. Again, now thinking of drone strikes, that this is the big thing that has haunted Obama in terms of foreign policy, is using drones to kill U.S. citizens overseas.
Yeah.
It's not fiction anymore. It's not something that's out there. It literally happened. And it happened after this movie was made, before this movie was made, at the moment this movie was made.
Yeah, because it is something where, like, in a weird way, like, you can read this movie now and with our modern context, with, like, the Blackbriar program and the super agents as being symbolically representative of drones. Like,
yes.
Because, like, they don't have a conscience. They are just ordered to do something. They do whatever you tell you. They do it with extreme efficiency. And if there's collateral damage, your government program has no oversight so that the collateral damage has no consequence for you.
And maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here in talking about the new movie that's coming out. But
Right.
one of the things I'm interested in is, how does Paul Greengrass respond to this stuff? Because to me, that's the reason to do another Bourne movie, is that 10 years later, realizing how prescient you were, and that Jason Bourne would have changed the world in the same way Edward Snowden did, in the same way Chelsea Manning did, in the same way WikiLeaks and things like this have, and that now we have a world with drones, and that there wouldn't be a need for Blackbriar. And what is Jason Bourne in that world? I mean, we see at the end hints that Bourne is on the news as the guy who leaked this stuff.
Yeah.
So what would he be in terms of fame, in terms of pop culture, you know, in this world that they have built? I'm very curious to see how they if they explore that in the new movie, because to me, that's why you make it.
Yeah, exactly.
And, you know, what would Bourne think of drones? Like, I feel like that should be the plot of the next movie, is him fighting a drone. Like,
Sure,
but there has to be a scene, like, where a drone is coming for him and he has to get out, right?
Yeah.
That's going to be a scene in the new movie.
It has to, yeah.
It just has to. So it's very interesting to me, all that. But, yeah, okay. So that's the political angle. Mostly this is just us gaping at this movie for being,
Yeah.
how did you figure this shit out, guys?
I mean, and that's also, like, if you are a college student listening to this, or, like, a graduate student or something, and you are looking for a topic to, like, write an essay on, that's a fucking layup for you right there, brother. Like, just go for it.
You don't even have to analyze it. Just recognize the patterns.
Yeah.
And then you're gold. That's an A+ right there.
There you go. I wish I had rewatched this movie several years ago. That would have been a really easy evening in one of my classes, writing an essay on this thing.
Yeah. So, all right. Let's talk about some other stuff with this movie. Going back to the beginning, this movie starts at the end of Bourne Supremacy, where he's trying to get out of Moscow, basically, after he does his apology. And I kind of like that they go back to that and think about, right, he was super fucked up. How did he get out of that?
Yeah, it's like he's got, like, a maybe broken leg. He's got a gunshot wound in his shoulder.
I mean, it is something we haven't talked about yet, that these movies generally don't skip steps.
Yeah.
We see how Bourne does stuff, and we see the methodology of it, how careful he is about this stuff. And so it is kind of nice to go back to that moment just as a nice palate cleanser to get into the Bourne Ultimatum. And we have this little chase. And then his first line in the movie is he gets a gun on the policeman chasing him, and he says, "My argument is not with you." And we cut to titles. Yeah. I love that. I think that's such an interesting statement, that my argument is not with you. And then the question becomes, well, who's it with?
Yeah.
You know?
It's with the man.
But it's a question throughout the movie, I think, because ultimately he has very good grievances against the government for what they did to him.
Yes.
And he has reason to leak the stuff he leaks for the good of mankind and to as some kind of atonement for what he's done. But in the end, not to get sounding too pretentious here, the argument is with himself.
Right.
This is a very internalized movie that we talked a lot about how he leaks the information alongside Pamela Landy, but the actual conclusion of the movie is him talking to Albert Finney, remembering his original sin, and choosing a new path.
Yeah.
And that's the climax that they really focus on here. And I think that's very interesting.
Yeah.
So we have that opening sequence. Daniel Bruhl is the actor who wins the Walton Goggins Award this time.
Okay.
He is Marie's brother. And Daniel Bruhl you would know now as the sniper guy in Inglourious Bastards.
Oh, okay.
And as the villain in Civil War.
Oh, shit.
That was Daniel Bruhl.
That is that guy.
Yep.
You are totally right.
See what I mean about the little actors who became big out of these movies?
Yeah. Jeez.
Yep. So you have all of them.
If only Bourne had taken him out when he had the chance, he would have saved Iron Man so much grief.
All right. So we've got the new character this time. The big new character is Noah Vosen, played by David Strathairn.
Yeah.
I love this guy.
Yeah, he's so good. He's probably my favorite of all the CIA dudes in these movies.
Because he's not Chris Cooper or Brian Cox in that you see him and you think villain.
Yeah.
And he's not really even slimy or sleazy. He's good at his job and he knows what to do. He's just got a different set of priorities than the ostensible good guys.
Yeah. Yeah, he feels like a very believable character, and like you can kind of understand some of his motivations, and at the same time, like kind of want him to get kicked in the teeth.
Yes, and he's a great sparring partner for Pamela Landy.
Yeah,
like from their first scene onwards, they're just really good together.
Yeah.
Also, I fucking love the CIA set in this movie where they're
it's
the blue.
Really good. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
it's awesome.
It's like what 124 always wanted to do, but never had the budget to do it.
And I think it's also influential. I feel like every CIA communications room now just looks like the Bourne Ultimatum.
Yeah.
It's kind of like how every meeting room post Doctor Strangelove looks like Doctor Strangelove.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's that kind of, maybe not as good as the Strangelove set design, but it's very good set design. So we have all of that. Okay, so we got him. I don't know if there's many other new characters. I mean, the big one is Albert Finney at the end, who comes in as that doctor. Love Albert Finney.
Yes.
Rest his soul. And I love how they use him where he's just this disembodied voice for most of the movie. And of course, because it's Albert Finney, this very recognizable voice, you feel it's almost like the voice of God.
Yeah.
And to an extent it is. I mean, we're talking about all the real world stuff. I think you can totally write a biblical allegory onto this entire movie.
Sure, yeah.
It's he kind of meets his maker at the end of the movie, he finds out about his original sin, and he gives up his name and leaves and dies and is reborn in water, baptismal again.
Yeah, I mean, because there's definitely something very surreal about the sequences at the end of the movie when he's encountering the Finney character and sort of like going through his past and like the sets and the way it's shot.
Yeah.
It's like, because it looks so different from everything else in the movie. It's so stark and so white and so bare that there's absolutely, like, whether you want to read it religiously, whether you want to like do a like psychoanalytic thing about it, like being his subconscious, his id or something, like there is that element of the movie of where like you go so deep inside that it's extremely unsettling, that sequence.
And that's why that feels like it's the end with the capital E end, because you get to this point where it's like everything else just kind of disappears.
Yeah.
It is his ultimate goal through all 3 movies is to get to that point, whether he knows it or not. That is what he's reaching for from moment 1 to the end.
Yeah.
And I love that about it. So anyway, we'll get to that later. I think we've talked about most of the new characters. You've got some of the one-off assassins who show up.
Yeah. I really appreciate that this movie came up with the Blackbriar thing to give it an excuse for new super agent people for Jason Bourne to fight.
Yes.
That would be really disappointing if there wasn't one in this one, because they killed all the Treadstone people in the last movie.
Yes. So you got 2. You've got the guy who shows up at the beginning and kills the reporter.
Yeah.
And then and he comes back at the end. And then you have Desh in the middle, who I believe I've watched the bonus features on the DVD for this one, and I think he's just a stunt guy.
I would be surprised.
Gives a very good performance just as this cold killer. And then, of course, he's very good in the fight scenes and everything. So, yeah. And then, of course, we got Nikki and everyone returning, but we'll talk about them in a little bit. Want to give a little more attention to that entire giant Waterloo set piece in the Waterloo station, because so you got the Simon Ross character played by Paddy Considine, and it's so interesting because it's an investigative journalism thing that rings very true now, and Bourne is trying to figure this stuff out, and it's another situation like in Supremacy where everybody has different motivations and no one knows what anyone else's motivations are.
Yeah.
So the CIA thinks Bourne is the leak, and they think Simon Ross is a threat, and Bourne wants to know who Simon Ross's leak is, and he's trying to figure out what Blackbriar is, and everyone's on a different page, and Simon Ross won't listen to Bourne, which makes it more stressful. But that is just, again, I think I'm probably with you. Overall, I would say the best action sequence is Tangiers, but I almost want to say it's Waterloo because of how much they do without any actual like fighting and killing and stuff.
Yeah. It's a really good sequence, especially when it's like punctuated with the reporter being shot.
Yeah.
Because it's like, even when I remembered that that's how that sequence ends, it still surprised me, because there's something about there's something about the way they shoot that and the way that the characters acted that you just feel like that reporter character is not going to die in that scene. Like,
absolutely.
It just feels like he's going to live and be like a character for longer, and it's like there's something very impactful about his death every time I watch it.
Because that's how this kind of story works.
Yeah.
That character does not die in this kind of story usually, but he gets killed before he can give Bourne a lick of information.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's what it is. I think it's not, because what it typically is like he's about to tell Jason Bourne something, or he just told him something, and that's the moment he gets killed. That's what you're like trained to expect, because that's the cliche. Instead, they don't do that at all. Like you keep on expecting still that it's like, oh no, how the scene's going to go is like Jason's going to find the guy and like get in a fist fight with him while the reporter's trying to get out and all that. Like that's how it's going to escalate, but it doesn't go that way at all. And it's also one of the handful of times in these movies where Jason like straight up loses. Like he fails at whatever his objective is at the time. It's very rare in these movies for that to happen. Like the other notable ones when Marie gets shot.
Yeah.
But that's another thing that's like very shocking about that, is that it gives you a sense of real danger and threat to it. That it's like Jason Bourne is a very, very capable guy, but he is not all-powerful. He can't save everybody. He's fallible. He can be beaten by other people in different ways.
Absolutely, and it's also it gives you the rising stakes of this movie, which is that, Bourne Identity, he's on the run. Bourne Supremacy, he's got a goal. He's not really on the offensive, though. He's doing his own thing. In this movie, he's full on the offensive. He is going after the CIA in some way or form. He's not trying to bring them down, but he's trying to figure out information. And so he is going right to the lion's den. This is going to be tougher. And he actually fails in a bunch of ways, this movie. Yeah. So Simon Ross dies, and he has to go rob his corpse to get the information. He gets to Tangier, and then that guy dies, the Daniels character. And so he has to figure out he has to improvise something new there. And then he gets to New York, and he barely gets where he's going by the skin of his teeth. I mean, the stakes in this movie just feel very, very high for him the whole time. It's life or death every moment.
Yeah, but at the same time, again, they never resort to Blackbriar being the secret project to brainwash the entire planet or something.
Yes. It's
Albert Finney just wants to become god of America or something.
I'll have to tell you about the Bourne legacy when we're done with this one.
Okay.
Anyway, because it kind of goes there. But let's see. So you've got all of that. The Waterloo sequence, fantastic. Tangier is where we really get the stuff with Nikki.
Yeah.
It actually starts before in Germany, I think, is where they are. And they meet. And I love that whole sequence where she's on the phone with Noah Vossum, and she's looking at Bourne, and Bourne's looking at her, and she's got the two keywords. Either she's under duress or she's not, and she decides to say she's not. And again, they actually do a weird thing where Nikki becomes kind of like the female mirror of Jason in this stretch of the movie.
Yeah.
It's actually it's Hitchcockian, honestly. If you think of things like Vertigo and the way identity is done between two people, I love this because she doesn't have a lot of lines either. They don't talk a lot. There's a lot of scenes where and Julia Stiles is great in this movie, just being very silent, looking at him. She has one thing on her mind, he has one thing on his, because they fundamentally have different experiences of each other, which is fascinating. So I love this whole stretch of the movie with the two of them together. It's basically the second act is the two of them.
Yeah.
And so you wind up in Tangier, and holy shit.
Yes.
The Tangier sequence. Basically, I had to list, like, what are the phases of this fucking thing? Because you start with a motorcycle chase.
Yeah.
Not even a chase, just a motorcycle he's following. Then the bomb goes off. Now we're in for a chase, in which Jason Bourne does, I think, the most badass thing of all time, where he gets a motorcycle from the ground at a stopped position and jumps over like a bunch of stairs onto another platform.
Yeah.
It happened because it happens on camera. I don't know the physics of that.
Yeah.
But it's amazing.
Yes.
So you have that. Then you go to the rooftop chase, which is amazing.
Yeah,
where
you have where now the agent is starting to go after Nikki, so she's trying to run away, and he's going after her, and Jason's up on the roof, and he's following them.
And there are cops after Jason,
Yeah.
and the only way he gets away from them is in Tangier, all the roofs have glass on the edges.
Right,
and so he gets that bandana, puts it around his hands, and just jumps over it that way.
Yeah, meanwhile, Nikki has gotten into a building and started climbing up, so she's, jumping from roof to roof.
Yep.
The desk starts following her up there.
Then you have the part where he's in the apartments jumping through windows.
Yes. Yeah.
In which we get one of the most iconic shots of 2000 cinema, which is where he jumps through a window and the camera follows him.
Yeah.
The normal cinematic language here is he would jump, you cut outside, you cut inside. Here instead he jumps and the camera just goes with him. It's breathtaking. The sound literally drops out of the movie to let you go at what they're doing there. And people have done this since, but that had never been done like that. Yeah. And then finally he gets through there and he fights Desh, and it's the most just violent brawl in the entire series.
It's definitely, to me, it's the marquee hand-to-hand fight sequence in this franchise. It's just because part of it is it coming at the culmination of this long, intense chase sequence that has, again, it's Desh chasing Nikki. And Desh, it's the cops chasing Jason, chasing Desh, chasing Nikki. Yes. And so it's following all these characters chasing each other along this line, through different means, and it follows all the stages of the motorcycle and the rooftops and all this stuff. And then it culminates in Jason jumping through the window, breaking the window, and then him and Desh just getting in this fucking intense hand-to-hand fight sequence that moves through a bunch of different phases of them improvising weaponry and stuff. And I love how it ends with Jason just getting the towel around his throat and slowly choking the guy out. It's just a really well choreographed, really well edited, performed in sort of a stunt way, well choreographed fight sequence. It's really well done. It's insane.
But this whole Tangier sequence, it's exhausting just to list what happens.
Yeah.
And it's a huge chunk of the movie there. And again, we were talking earlier about Star Trek Beyond and movies like that where you have action on action on action and it can get exhausting. I think I know what your answer is, but I'll let you say this. What differentiates the Bourne Ultimatum?
It's that they don't just do action sequences for the whole movie. They find ways to keep the tension up and make the tension dynamic without relying on it being an action sequence. And that's what we're talking about, with you loving the Waterloo scene so much and saying that that's almost your favorite action sequence, even if it's weird to call it that, because it is operating on a lot of same wavelengths that we think of as action scenes do, and that it is extremely tense, and it has this progression, and it has this choreography, and the way that the sound works and the way it's edited, it feels kind of like an action scene, but it's not. And so you're the audience response to it is naturally different. The dynamics of it are very different, and so that's to me, that's what's really important, is that to keep the audience on their toes, to not just be repeating the same thing over and over and over again. And so that's why, there's 3 hand-to-hand fight scenes in these movies. There's basically one in each movie. They don't do a bunch of hand-to-hand fight sequences. They don't do a bunch of car chases. There's one car chase in the Bourne Ultimatum. There's one car chase, really, in Bourne Supremacy. There's, one car chase in the Bourne Identity. While they have a number of different action sequences, they are all action sequences of different types, and they are all separated by stretches of like characters moving from place to place by like some like elements of exposition, mostly visible or visual exposition in these movies because they don't rely on the dialogue, or it's the elements of intrigue and getting into the characters in that way, and it just balances all those elements expertly. And so the movies never write themselves into a corner the way that Star Trek does, or a lot of movies. Like I said in the last episode, Aliens is my big the one I think about a lot for this sort of issue of where you have written the plot in such a way that, like, at the end of the movie, you have to have all these action sequences where you go to the alien queen and you rescue Newt and you get back on the ship, and then the alien queen follows you and you get into the power loader, and, like, you have to do all these things because that's the way they've all been set up. And, like, the Bourne Ultimatum doesn't need to do that. It doesn't set up more than it can pay off. It sets up what it needs to, does it when it needs to do it, and then moves on to the next step of the plot.
I think using Tangiers as an example, it also builds into and out of action sequences so beautifully, where the build into Tangiers, this long mystery, intrigue, before things really blow up, they are pulling that rope tighter and tighter and tighter, and then it just snaps. And when it snaps, they deliver good.
Yeah.
But then when it's over, and Desh is dead, and Bourne is on the ground bloodied and beaten, and Nikki is traumatized, as anyone would be, there's a great, like, all-time great scene for the Bourne movies here where they're talking and Jason is kind of rubbing off the blood, and he has this speech about how I can see the faces. And he says, I remember every person I've ever killed. I don't remember my name. I don't remember all these things, but I can see the faces. And it's just this, it's just quiet speech. It's a quiet exchange between him and Nikki. And there's a couple scenes with the two of them after that, and her realizing she's going to have to go on the run. And I forget where it's exactly positioned, but you have that scene where she's looking at him, and she finally just says, "You don't," or she says, "It was hard for me with you," and you just realize, okay, they were involved in some way. I don't know if they were boyfriend and girlfriend. I don't know if it was a fling. They were good friends. Whatever it was, they were involved. And Jason kind of gets it, but he can't do anything about it. He doesn't remember it, and she isn't going to blame him for it. It's not his fault. He has amnesia and these sorts of things. And it's just those little character moments that, you know, they breathe as quietly as the action sequences explode. You know, it's a very great, these peaks and valleys of the movie that feel so natural. Yeah,
it's like they do such a good job at slowly, like, because they start ratcheting up the tension very early and do it very slowly. And so then by the time when, as you said, like, the shit hits the fan and things snap, they snap real good because it's very satisfying. And when you finally get the confrontation between Bourne and Desh, like, that has been built up so much within that sequence in a very focused way, in a way that's not like, oh, they set him up at, like, in the first act of the movie because they showed this scene of him, like, killing this person or something and got away, and it's like, like, they focus on it and, like, they build it up within the context of the sequence, and it's very focused, very strong. Build it till they finally have the confrontation, have a fantastic fight scene, and then they unpack the tension from that and they let it come down, and they let Bourne have that moment to really catch his breath in a way that, like, going back to the Star Trek example, like, at the end of that movie when, like, you're having action sequence after action sequence after action sequence, there is no moment when, like, after they defeat the drone army, that then Kirk gets to catch his breath before he goes fights the villain, right? Like, you don't get that moment of, like, small respite where he gets to talk with another character and sort of, like, talk through what just happened. They just move straight into the next action sequence, whereas here, they just build these whole set pieces around the scale of the tension and the way that it builds and then releases, and then they just let that whole sequence breathe, and then when it's done, they move on to the next one. And that's the right way to handle it.
Absolutely. So then we get the New York sequence, and my entire notes for New York is New York stuff. Holy fuck!
Yeah, that's a good,
pretty much
accurate note. Accurate note. Good note taking, John.
I mean, just breaking down those last 40 minutes of the movie, it really is incredible. Yeah. How densely plotted it is, how many machinations are going on, and how much happens on a character, thematic, political, however many levels you want to count. But this is where we sort of double back and we get the scene from the Bourne Supremacy, where Pamela Landy is now in a position where she doubts her superiors enough to be open to talking to Bourne.
Yeah.
Bourne has realized this, contacts her, she gives him the code, and they kind of very skillfully rework that scene from Supremacy.
Yeah.
And it was weird the first time I saw this movie. I remember, you know, because again, Supremacy puts themselves in this weird hole where, okay, he's in New York now, what happens? And then you start Ultimatum, and you're in the past, and you're really trying to figure out, well, where does this happen in relation to that scene at the end of Supremacy?
Yeah.
And then you finally hit that point, and you're like, oh, that's what they were doing. This is crazy.
Yeah.
You know? And so that's kind of fun that they do that. And, you have the thing where she goes off to meet Bourne at the fake location while he goes into Vosum's office.
Yeah.
And again, it's just how much cutting there is. This is like another big version of like that Waterloo sequence where there's just so many moving pieces and perspectives and the editing is so tight.
Yeah.
And then, of course, to get out of Vosum's office and back to 415 71st,
Yeah.
they say it so many times I remember it, to where he is going to meet Albert Finney. It's time for another car chase. And while the one in Supremacy is the king, this one's pretty fucking good.
It's a very good car chase.
It starts with him at the top of a parking garage, and to escape the police, he drives it off the roof and just crashes the car.
Like, he drove off the roof, sir. What did you say? He drove off the roof.
It's a great little laugh in the middle of this sequence. And I love how this one ends. So he's being chased by that assassin from earlier, and he's up on the median, and he's about to get smashed. He just realizes, oh, fuck. And he, goes down across the two seats and just wraps his arm around the seat belt.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I would say that's unrealistic, except I'm guessing someone figured out how that would save him.
Yeah, it feels like that, right? It does feel like they had a fucking physicist or someone on set just it's like, well, let me just calculate the net force of this one right here. What would you say his acceleration would be at this moment? Okay.
Yeah. It's something where whatever Jason Bourne does, you tend to trust that it would work because they do such a good job building each moment.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's great. And again, kind of in an echo of the Supremacy scene and several other scenes in the trilogy, he has a chance to kill the assassin and he doesn't. So that's great. And then we get to the building. He gives the stuff to Pamela Landy. One of the weirdly tensest scenes in the series also is here where she is trying to fax the stuff.
Yeah.
And Vosum is getting closer and you just want that last page to get through.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
So,
that's just a really great payoff for the Landy character in general because they've done such a good job at building her up across the two movies that when she finally gets her moment of victory, it's just fuck you guys, fuck your secret black project bullshit.
Yeah.
I just faxed it all to the newspaper.
No, I love Vosum walks into the room and he's ready to I'd kill her if he has to or whatever, and then he sees what's on the fax and he just deflates because he realizes it's over.
Yeah.
And she says, "Get yourself a lawyer." And
it's
Joan
great
Allen,
moment.
very good in these movies.
Yeah, definitely.
That's great. And then, as we say, the sort of weird metaphysical ending where he's with Albert Finney and everything kind of comes home to roost. And he remembers that first scene and that the big revelations here being that he volunteered for this, he wanted this, he became Jason Bourne of his own volition. And I think that is such an interesting way to do this because the easy version of this ending, the Hollywood version of this ending, is he gets there, realizes how manipulated he was, and kills Albert Finney, and then goes off and fucks Nikki or something. Right? That's the James Bond ending.
Yeah, no, he has a threesome with Nikki and Landy.
Okay.
They all get it on together. It's a fun, happy time that the movie song plays.
Yes, absolutely. And that's almost literally, I think, what happens in the Bourne Legacy, in this version of it, where the Bourne Legacy ends with the Jeremy Renner character with his girlfriend on a boat sailing into the sunset.
Okay,
and I'm not kidding about that. So it's
that is definitely not how the Bourne movies handle it.
No, because it goes for the hardest version of this, which is that he is not absolved in any way by what he learns.
Yeah, part of him leaking those documents, part of that is going to be he was involved personally in this project. He killed all these people. One of the people he killed was whoever the guy was in the flashback that they just had there in the corner that he executes to sort of complete his training. That he has no idea who this person is, no idea why they want him to shoot him, and he just does it. He is 100% implicated in everything involved with that program. If they caught him, he would probably be put to the death sentence.
Yes. And so he learns this. He decides not to kill the Albert Finney character. And he says, "I'm not Jason Bourne."
Yeah.
And so we have that. He goes to the roof, and he meets the assassin again. And just he's deflated. He realizes it's over, and he says, "Look at us. Look at what they make you give."
Yeah.
And a great little detail I love is the assassin has his gun trained on him and then drops it. And then it's Vosum who comes up and shoots at Bourne.
Yeah.
And we don't see if he hits or not. Bourne falls into the river, and then we have this little montage at the end where Bourne is in the river, and then we keep cutting to, with the last moments of the John Powell score, to different people like Vosum and to Nikki and to Pamela Landy, and everyone kind of de-escalating things. And
dealing with the aftermath of
right.
everything that just went on and the leaking of the documents.
And then at the end, they are mentioning Jason Bourne on the news. They say a body has not been recovered, and we cut to Nikki, and she smiles. Moby plays, and then Bourne comes back to life and swims away.
Swims away, yeah.
name a more perfect ending to just about anything.
Yeah, because also, the obviously, other thing is that it is a direct visual callback to the very beginning
of Bourne Identity.
Of the franchise, the Bourne Identity, where he is, shot in the back and is in the middle of the ocean, just sort of, floating there, and this, sailing, fishing boat picks him up, and here, again, it's, it's a very simple sort of, screenwriting or just, storytelling trick, but it's extremely effective here because you're not necessarily expecting them to do it, because it's, it's been a long time, even then, since the first movie came out. It had been 5 years at that point. And so it wrapping all the way back around and using that visual imagery, but then changing it at the end to show, how the character has progressed and changed, and that he is not this, vulnerable, weak, battered person who doesn't know who he is, doesn't know what he's doing, doesn't know, what his purpose is, has no real, motivation. And he's changed from that as someone who has, taken control of his own life so he can now swim, it's a... While it is a simple and basic storytelling trick, it is so effectively done here.
And it's so...
And coupled with the sound, the music of the Moby song, it's just a really triumphant moment for the franchise.
And it's so organically arrived at. This is the problem with circularity and storytelling. Is circularity is great if you can get there organically, but oftentimes you have to really work yourself into... you just have to spin yourself up in knots to get to the point where you can do that. I mean... A great example of this is something like The Dark Knight Rises, of how you try to come full circle with sort of the themes of death and rising and all these things, and some of it works, and some of it is just so ham-fisted, learning that he's Robin and all of that, and that Bruce is somehow alive, and he's in Italy and all these things, and that is not an organic ending to that series. This is fully organic, because we've watched Jason on every point along the way, but also him deciding, to throw away this identity, to throw away the Bourne Identity, the entire, the name of this franchise, and throw that away and kind of start over in whatever way, and that we are left to our imaginations. As you say, there's that one change, which is that he swims. And so he is clearly, we can, infer aware in some way of what he's doing, and he's going to keep moving.
Yeah.
But the rest of that is left to our imaginations. It is this wonderful, suggestive ending.
Yeah, and it's another, just example of the very strong visual storytelling that they use, that it leaves enough for you to sort of interpret, and that it, leaves enough room for, even though they're, very, contemporary political action movies, there's a lot of sort of, symbolic interpretation you can perform with it as well if you are inclined to do so, particularly with this one, with the ending, by leaning so heavily on the visual elements, they inevitably lean on symbolism, and they just do it so effectively that it's a very meaty sort of thematic topic for them to sort of dig into.
Yeah, and I really, was thinking of kind of the biblical allegory this time, that the white room, the very angelic space that is sort of tainted, and this idea of original sin, and that is what he's trying to find the whole time, because only then can he move on. But there are, like you say, there's the psychoanalytic interpretation. The literal works just fine.
Yeah.
But I mean,
you don't need to... And that is the most important element of any story, is that you do not need to engage with the subtext to enjoy it. The text itself is perfectly fine, but it does have that subtextual element that if you want to really read some sort of religious element into it, you can. If only he, instead of it being Jason Bourne, he had a last name that started with a C, then it would really work. They didn't go that route, so that's what makes me lean more the psychoanalytic way. But
well, he's not a Christ figure. Even if you go under the biblical allegory, they had no point do they try to make him a Christ figure.
But you don't remember that time when Jesus Christ lost his memory after he murdered 30 people? You clearly have not been reading the Lost Testament. So.
Okay, I want them to do a Jesus movie where he gets out from behind the rock after 3 days. He has amnesia. He doesn't know he's the Son of God or anything, and he's got to go out, and he's got a special set of skills.
Yeah.
He doesn't know where they come from. The Jesus identity.
We'll just wait for Passion of the Christ 2.
You're joking. They actually announced that. Did you know that?
Yeah,
okay.
That's why I'm making the joke.
Yeah. It's Mel Gibson. Anything could happen.
Yeah.
It'll probably be anti-Semitic.
Sure.
That's the one thing we know of a Mel Gibson movie. Yeah. It'll probably be anti-Semitic. All right. What else to say about the Bourne Ultimatum? I am blown away every time I watch it and again, more so now than I was in 2007, because we've had this litany of disappointing trilogy cappers.
Yeah.
And some were in that same year, like Spider-Man 3 was that year, or Pirates of the Caribbean 3, which I actually think is an okay movie, but it's, as a trilogy capper, very problematic, in the same way The Matrix Revolutions is very problematic, in the same way The Dark Knight Rises is very problematic. There's a lot of examples you can go to, and the Bourne Ultimatum is better than all of those.
Yes, yeah. And like you said, it is one of, if not the, tightest cap to a trilogy of films there is. Like, it's, and not just like, that's because like all the movies feel tight and interconnected, very strong, and like that's something that's very highlighted when you watch them in sequence this way. It's a really tight sequence of movies.
And I mean, when I think of other great narrative trilogies, and not like thematic trilogies like the Three Colors trilogy by Kieslowski or something like that, but like narrative ones like Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings obviously has a beautiful trilogy capper, but that's also a different thing because these movies were filmed at the same time.
Yeah,
they
and
had
like
a book.
Lord of the Rings isn't really a trilogy; like it is just one continuous story. Like there's
exactly
like the trilogy, like assignment of it is completely artificial.
Or one of the other trilogies that people would often say each movie is better than the last is like Toy Story, and we have those three.
Sure,
but that's one where the story is not continuous. Each movie is its own thing. And
there's no like necessarily thematic through line of like one building up the step of the previous one.
Yeah, and
they're
that's
all like kind of discussing different subjects.
Right, and that's fine. That's what they are. But like in terms of Hollywood, this Hollywood ideal of the trilogy where a story starts and ends over 3 movies and all this stuff, I don't think you can point to a better one than the Bourne Trilogy.
Yeah,
The Godfather 3 is the one we're forgetting, like the original disappointing trilogy capper.
The Godfather of disappointing trilogy cappers. Yeah.
Yes. Which, I looks anemic next to something like this in terms of, a story about identity and all these things in crisis and coming together at the end. It's great. And it is so good that I am very much looking forward to this new one. I am also hesitant because this is such a good ending, and I think so much of what makes the ending powerful is that it is suggestive, and you don't know what happens next, and it just leaves you hanging in the best way possible. That I think you very, 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 very much do not need a 4th one.
Yeah, no.
But if Matt Damon and Paul Greengrass said they wanted to do one, I assume they have a good idea. They have not given us a reason to distrust them yet.
Yeah, and the world we live in has changed enough after stuff like Snowden, the prominence of drone strikes, like the whole fucking weird political world we live in with sort of like a sort of like rise of neo-fascism in a way with like Brexit and Trumpism and that kind of stuff, that like we are in a different enough place that it feels like Jason Bourne has a place to sort of tell another story here. Like, whether or not they do it well, we'll have to see when we watch the movie. But, like, there is definitely room to make a very good movie now. In a way that, like, if they had tried to make a Jason Bourne 4 in 2009, I don't think there was.
No, and we know what that looked like. It was the Bourne Legacy.
Well, you know what that looked like. I didn't fucking go watch that thing.
The Bourne Legacy is one of the worst movies I've ever seen in a theater. And let me talk about it for like 5 seconds.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Fair enough. If you don't even know, the Bourne Legacy is the one they made after the Bourne Ultimatum. I think it came out in 2012, so like 5 years later. They could not get Matt Damon back. They could not get Paul Greengrass back. So they decided, you know what sequel was great? Son of the Pink Panther.
Okay.
When Peter Sellers was dead and buried, and we decided to do another Pink Panther movie, acknowledging that Clouseau existed, we just don't see him. That's the one we're going to ape for this. So Tony Gilroy wrote and directed it. Jeremy Renner starred. And instead of like recasting Jason Bourne, which would be I wouldn't necessarily want them to do it. It would be the smart thing to do for that kind of story.
Right.
If you really want to continue it, they didn't do that. They have Jeremy Renner playing it's another agency. It's like Blackbriar 2 or something that operates in parallel to Blackbriar.
Okay.
And he is one of those agents. And he is an enhanced super soldier who has to take these special pills because he has some kind of thing. It's like a comic book story. Right. He has some kind of thing in his body that is enhancing all of his abilities. And if he doesn't take the pills, it'll overwhelm him and give him a stroke or something like that. So that's part of the plot.
Okay.
The Bourne Legacy happens in tandem with the Bourne Ultimatum for the first half. It starts as Bourne is hunting down Simon Ross. And so you get replays of a bunch of those scenes. Noah Vosom is in it for like the first half. And
wait, like in new scenes?
In new and old scenes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's weird.
That is weird. And so you have that, and for the first half, Jeremy Renner is up in like this snow cabin training, and then when whatever happens with Bourne happens in Bourne Ultimatum, they decide to kill all the Blackbriar 2 agents so they don't learn about Blackbriar 2. And so a drone comes and blows up the cabin, but Jeremy Renner lives, and so then he has to go after the people who betrayed him. And at some point he meets Rachel Weisz, who is playing a doctor who he falls in love with or something. It's stupid. And then at some point, Noah Vosom leaves the picture, and Edward Norton comes in as the new CIA bad guy.
Presumably, it's not like Edward Norton is not playing himself as the CIA bad guy. He's playing.
He might as well be, but yes, he is playing a character, and it is the most convoluted story I've ever seen in a movie because the actual overall plot is just Jeremy Renner needs to find the place where they make the pills so he can take the pills and live.
Okay,
but on top of that, Tony Gilroy layers just so much narrative barf of, like, at the beginning you have all the stuff with the Ultimatum where it intersects with that, and you have, well, they think they took down Blackbriar, but they didn't know about Blackbriar 2 or whatever it's named.
Yeah.
And so there's that, and that's crazy, and then Edward Norton's trying to clean things up, and there's like 10 more layers of conspiracy. It basically completely nullifies everything that happened in the Bourne Ultimatum. It is so silly, and throughout this they're talking about Jason Bourne like he's around the corner or he's over here or whatever, like Jason Bourne did this so we need to react to this, but of course Matt Damon's not in the movie, so that's silly. And so Jeremy Renner is never really gets to play his own character, because the important character in this story is Jason Bourne. He's the one who's doing everything that matters, happens off screen by Jason Bourne from stuff from the last movie, and Jeremy Renner is just reacting to it and trying to get away. It's a completely uninteresting protagonist. And the only real action in the movie is at the end, where there is the most anemic scooter chase you will ever see, where they're basically on Vespas trying to get away from like a drone or something, going like 5 miles an hour. Tony Gilroy had no idea how to shoot action. It's just fucking terrible.
Okay, I'm glad I didn't watch it then.
Yeah. It like completely misunderstood everything that was good about the other two movies. And it has no visual style to it whatsoever. Like, you desperately miss Paul Greengrass. It doesn't even have John Powell doing the music. Like, it's very bad.
Like, do you think that they should do a thing now that they're doing, like, proper Jason Bourne movies that was like when Godzilla Final Wars had Godzilla proper kill the shitty American Godzilla in, like, a throwaway action scene where he blows him up and, like, this ridiculous butt rock song plays? Do you think they should do that where actual Jason Bourne kills the Jeremy Renner character in, like, a completely throwaway, like, nothing fight scene, just kind of snaps his neck?
I think that'd be great. I know, so just as reference to like the production history of these, so they made the Bourne Legacy. It bombed for one because it was bad, but they wanted to do more. They actually had hired Justin Lin, who made Star Trek Beyond, to make a sequel to the Bourne Legacy with Jeremy Renner, and it was going to come out this year. But all this time, these 10 years, they had a standing order to Paul Greengrass and Matt Damon. If you have an idea and you want to make one, we will give you as much money as you want, just come make the movie. And at some point, they came to him and said, we figured it out, we want to make the movie. And so they canceled the Justin Lin movie, gave that date to the new Bourne movie.
Okay.
So just completely kicked that movie to the curb, said, we'll do the real one. But they also have, at one point they had this whole franchise plan where they wanted to do one with Renner, and then one with Damon, and then do one with the both of them, kind of like what they did with Fast and Furious back in the day. I don't think that's going to happen, because if Paul Greengrass has actually seen Bourne Legacy, I would be shocked. Like, if they actually sat through that thing.
Yeah.
So this was the whole... So my whole... This is a long way of saying, if they do the team-up movie, I hope that's how it happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because there would be no reason to do it. And I don't even know... I wonder if this is just Paul Greengrass and Matt Damon saying, we're doing a one-off? Are they planning more after this? Is this just... We wanted to do one more and that's it? It's just a sequel to the trilogy, but it's its own thing? I'm very curious to see what their plan is with this.
Yeah.
Because the marketing has given nothing away. Like, there's no hint of a plot.
Yeah, all I know is that, like, Tommy Lee Jones is in it, and then the guy also goes, like, that's Jason Bourne.
Yeah.
That's the movie. And then Jason Bourne punches a dude in the face. That's the whole movie, as far as I can understand it, from the trailer that I watched, like, 5 hours ago.
Yeah. But I hope you can understand from this long discussion of the trilogy why we are operating on faith with this one.
Yeah, no, like, it's a movie I'm very excited to go see, especially now that I just rewatched all these ones over the past week.
They have earned our ticket.
Yeah, no, like, they are... If you're, for some reason, you have listened to this whole podcast and you haven't watched them, fucking watch them. Or if you have, like, but you haven't seen them since they were in the theater or something like that, like, definitely give them another watch, because they hold up very well, and it's particularly the case of Ultimatum. I think they prove, like, in the modern context than even they were in 2007.
Like fine wine.
Yeah,
improve with time.
Yeah, like everything that Matt Damon makes, just improves with time.
Ocean's 12?
Probably. I haven't seen that one in a long time. Who knows?
I was thinking about this, that the other trilogy that came out like parallel to the Bourne movies was the Ocean's movies. I even think they came out the same years as the Bourne movies. And that's like the other... And I love those movies. They're very fun. Yeah. But it's like, that's Matt Damon in such a vastly different role.
Yeah. But it was something like watching all these Jason Bourne movies. It reminds me, it's like, I really like Matt Damon. He's a really great movie star. Like, he's very fun, and he has such a, like, unique sense of presence that it was just like, I don't know. I just, like, hadn't thought about Matt Damon in a while, because I still haven't seen The Martian. I haven't gotten around to that one yet. But, like, it's just been a while since I'd seen a Matt Damon-led movie. It's like, fuck yeah, Matt Damon. you're really good at this shit.
You'll like The Martian. That scene where he snaps the Martian's neck, it's crazy.
Yeah, there's like this whole sequence where like NASA is like getting in on like the Martian cellular communication, and like Matt Damon is like trying to figure out like, who am I? Like, am I a Martian? Am I a human? I've got a Martian passport and an Earth passport. Like, which one is the real me? Is it Globbity Glob, the Martian man, or is it Jason Bourne? I don't know.